this aspect had to be sacrificed due to the pandemic. However, we assume that the other objectives will be achieved also in the virtual format. Coming back to the objectives of the final conference, we hope that the common discussion will support mutual learning and will feed into recommendations we will formulate based on the experiences in Geecco and Target. As I said, these recommendations will be available quite soon for Geecco and by the end of the project duration of Target. So, Brigitte, it's yours.
My turn. Wow, that's okay. This computer doesn't. Oh, yes, it does. Okay, well, we decided just before we start off to bring in the context of our project. You might remember or have in mind, but maybe not all of you, that there are those gender equality objectives of the European research area, which is basically those 3 pillars targeting scientific careers at all levels. And we know that we are yet not there, like having, I think, about 24% of top academic positions occupied by women, and women severely underrepresented in STEM fields still. Then you have this pillar of gender balance in decision-making bodies and positions. And here we are aiming for a target of at least 40% of the underrepresented sex, which is quite an ambitious target given the fact that we are still not there with gender equality in the scientific careers. And the third pillar, it's about the integration of gender dimensions in research and innovation context, so sex and gender analysis, and also the integration of gender in teaching. This is what was the background for Geecco and for Target. Just to see what's next, you all know that we are now in Horizon Europe, and the JEP requirements have changed a little bit. So where we are heading to is similar topics than we had before in terms of gender balance in leadership and decision making and gender equality in recruitment and career. But we see 2 additional topics, which is work-life balance and organizational culture, and also measures against gender-based violence, including sexual harassment. So we see that the work of our projects and other sister projects has brought about some further knowledge about what happens within research producing and also funding organizations, and what are the crucial issues there. And okay, I hand over to Angela again to introduce the Target project.
Yes, just for those who don't know, Target taking a reflexive approach to gender equality for institutional transformation. Brigitte, would you go on one slide, please? The Target project started in 2017, like Geecco, and will end by the end of the year. Target is based on the assumption that a sustainable gender equality policy is going beyond the formal adoption of a gender equality plan through the development of a reflexive gender equality culture in implementing institutions. Target is also based on the multidimensional gender equality concept Brigitte talked already about. So we are convinced that to pursue gender equality in science and research needs to address the 3 main gender equality objectives. So fixing the numbers, fixing the institution, and fixing the knowledge. Simultaneously, but with a different weighting probably of these 3 pillars or dimensions. In Target, we focused on the process of the development of a gender equality plan. And we thought that, or we are convinced that a gender equality plan should be embedded in a cyclical, evidence-based and reflexive process. And this should be targeted to the specific context of the implementing institution. So there is no one-fits-all solution. And this aspect will become clear in the presentations later. We also think that it is necessary to focus on the reflexive elements in the gender equality plans or the process of developing and implementing them, like monitoring and evaluation, which provide somehow a room for reflexivity. And what we also thought, and what is a key element of the target approach, is that the development and implementation of the gender equality plan should be embedded in a group of supporters within the institution. We call them community of practice, in order to avoid a situation where gender equality is somehow based on the shoulders of one change agent alone. And such a community of practice also supports discourse about gender equality within the institutions. And last but not least, the development and implementation of a gender equality plan should be embedded in a national gender equality discourse. This is a specific challenge for target partners, or has been, as in their national policy in R&I, there is not a specific, or has not been a specific focus on gender equality. And this brings me to the composition of the target consortium. So next slide, please. The target implementing partners are one accreditation institution, ARASIS from Romania, two funding organizations, FRB and RIF from Italy and Cyprus, one non-university research institution, ELIAMEP from Greece, and two universities, the University of Belgrade and the University Hassan II in Casablanca. And we have a partner in the project, which is a network of engineering schools in the Mediterranean Basin, RMI. What our partners have in common is that they all are located in countries which have been classified as rather inactive regarding gender equality in research and innovation. And so this provides somehow a specific challenge or context for the project. We have two supporting partners in the project, the Fondazione Giacomo Brondolini from Italy and Notus from Spain. Yes, I would like to leave it with that for the moment, and we will hear more about the implementation later.
Okay, thank you. So I very briefly and quick go through Chico project by first telling you that we still don't know how to pronounce our acronym. So partners are there who say Geecco, others say Chico or Czechco. Whatever you like, it's perfect. It's gender equality in engineering through communication and commitment. It's in a way quite similar to what Angela told you about target, but still different. We have 4 university partners on board with a STEM focus. So that's the specificity of Chico, actually, to be located in the engineering field. And those universities set up gender equality plans and implemented first and second drafts, and we are now in the 3rd round. We have 2 funding organizations on board. They started figuring out what the surrounding of funding organizations is and how to introduce gender equality or implement in funding schemes, program, and their processes. So all together, we tried to have some sort of self-reflective learning environment. So this needed the help of our facilitators, and we have also an evaluator who did the quantitative and qualitative monitoring, and we had some sort of mid-term evaluation, so we could learn from that and improve also on knowing what the evaluation brought about. Who is there in the Chico Consortium? It's university partners from Austria, Italy, like the University Reggio Calabria, from Poland, it's Politecnia Krakowska, and from Spain, so that's the Politecnia de Catalunya. Our funding agency partners are Czech Republic, Technologická Agentura České republiky, oh, they will hate me, and the Austrian Wissenschafts- und Forschungs- und Technologiefonds. Our facilitators are from Belgium and Austria, it's Yellow Windows and B&K. And our evaluator comes from Germany, which is Geecco. As Angela already mentioned, Chico project already is close to the end of our lifetime, so it's another 6 weeks to go until the end of April. And I would like to take the opportunity to publicly thank the consortium actually for 4 years of working, struggling, fighting for gender equality together. We have shared a lot of work and knowledge, and we have implemented projects and taken steps. We also shared the outbreak of COVID-19 and what came about with that. And I think for those 4 years of effort, solidarity, cooperation, and inspiration, it's time to thank the consortium. Thank you, all my partners. And now, let's see what we have learned. Actually, we have learned a lot. And what we are doing now is that Angela and me, from the coordinator's perspective, give some insights on what we see in our projects.
Yes, to start with the dimension of structural change, what we have learned regarding structural change. As Brigitte said, the projects differ in some respects, but when we prepared for this event, we recognized that the lessons learned are quite similar. So we brought them together. Our implementing partners started a reflexive structure change policy. In both projects, capacity building took place. Partners analyzed the status quo of regarding gender equality, defined objectives, and developed targeted gender equality plans. The implementation of these plans started, it was reflected on based on monitoring and evaluation. And in some cases, this led to the adoption of the gender equality plans. What became quite clear for us is that such an evidence-based cyclical approach needs time on the one hand. So 4 years are a possibility to start such a process, but the process is obviously not terminated by that time. It also needs resources, so financial and personal resources. Also top-down commitment, plus the internal community of practice or the support of internal stakeholders who form a group of advocates for gender equality. And what is also needed is the advice of facilitators or supporting partners with a different degree, of course, depending on the degree of management support, but also on the political context. What we also have learned is that the implementation is challenged by resistances at institutional level, also by changes in management, which can be a push, but also a challenge. What our institutions have also been challenged by is the absence of a national gender equality discourse in research and innovation. And in some cases, very explicit anti-gender state policies. These challenges are difficult to overcome by an institution on its own, and we will come back to that later. Brigitte?
Thank you. Oh my God. Yes, here we are. Okay, so what I would like to highlight is it's like two different topics. One is the specificity that we are dealing with coming from the STEM field and reflecting on this environment in science, technology, and engineering, and what we experienced there and what might be different to other places like social sciences or humanities. We need to keep in mind that the STEM field has some specific peculiarities. So first of all, there are a few connecting points from within the disciplines. Angela already mentioned that besides this top-down commitment, you would need some sort of internal community of practice or people gathering and supporting gender equality issues. This is quite difficult in the STEM field because actually there are no logical points of where you could go and find allies, not from the content point of view. Another thing, and this is I think even severe, at least how I experience this now for some decades already, there is some specific logic that is prevalent in the STEM field, and this is what we term the positivistic one correct answer. So you have one problem and there will be the one best solution. At least that's very often the case in the STEM field, how they are dealing with problems. But this is very different from having context-depending solution ambiguities and so on. So very often it is difficult to make engineers understand what the problem with gender equality is and why some solutions are not like you fix it at once, but it's more like setting up a process. It's about changing cultures and so on. And what is also interesting, and that's actually where I want to put my fingers on, is that there is actually partly, at least in some research areas, a lot of gender research there, but it somehow exists in a parallel universe to what engineers, what real engineers and the mainstream research is doing. What we see and what we observe for a couple of years now is that the discourse about gender in research content comes primarily from outside the research producing organizations. So it's the funding organizations and the big programs like Horizon 2020 and the upcoming Horizon Europe. So this is basically about economic pressure. If you force them to think about and to make clear if and in what way there is gender aspects in their content, then maybe they do. We come back to this later. Then you have the pressure from publishers and journals. So this is about scientific excellence and about the fact that very often parts of published materials are not accepted anymore. This is true if you don't have, I don't know, mixed persons that are in the usability studies, but also with lab animals and tissues. And then you have this national law situation. So if there is a national law, like we have it in Spain now, for instance, to include gender into teaching, into the curricula. So this also works out. This brings me to a point to think that something is quite interesting about these scientific communities within the STEM field, because they themselves, they really don't have regulatory mechanisms to integrate gender aspects. And I have seen lots and lots of huge conferences from ICT field, from energy field, mobility research, where you have the mainstream research conference and sessions and workshops, and then you have the one gender workshop, and it's always the same people who gather there, and they won't get into contact with others. So that's a huge problem, and I think that really sanctions are needed to change things there. Another point that I want to put my finger on is the situation of women within this gender equality work. So I have seen quite different situations in gender equality engagement in different places during the lifetime of our project. It's not so uncommon for these concerns to be raised, and you find yourself in a setting as you see at the left picture. But just as often, I have seen and experienced situations where dedicated fighters for gender equality have worked themselves into the ground. So there is a tendency of many institutions, Angela mentioned that already, to make one person or very few people responsible for gender equality, and the rest of the institution is not responsible and does not activate itself. And I think it's important really to understand that gender equality needs, I emphasize this again, Angela already mentioned, adequate resources so that it does not build on the exploitation of mostly women again. Okay, so having this said, what's next, Angela?
Yeah, based on these lessons learned and coming back to the upcoming changes in the European policy, we arrive at first conclusion or a first resume, which will be complemented and enriched by today's discussions. We have learned in our partner organizations that the orientation towards the European Union or the aim to become a modern organization are main drivers for institutional gender equality policies. And this, given the upcoming gender equality plan requirements for institutions applying in Horizon Europe, this requirement carries an enormous potential to support gender equality in R&I, especially to support the further development of policies in countries and institutions which already started their engagement regarding gender equality. However, we also think that it entails the risk of widening the gap between more advanced countries and less advanced countries regarding gender equality. One aspect that supports this assumption is that more active countries regarding gender equality in R&I started the process more than 20 years ago, at the latest when gender mainstreaming became a European strategy. And it's not so easy to compensate this process and the related learnings without dedicated time and resources. Therefore, we are convinced that the gap requirement should be embedded in a policy discourse between the European Union and member states and associated countries, which aims at three main objectives. One would be to establish an understanding of gender equality that is shared between all actors, that goes beyond women's representation. This policy discourse should also provide arguments and also incentives to engage in gender equality issues. And we think it is necessary to establish quality criteria for gender equality plans to make sure what is on it, that what is named the gender equality plan contains specific aspects or building blocks. We also are convinced that further support for institutions and countries which start this journey is needed. So having that in mind, we are very interested in the following presentations and discussions. And for the first session, we will now hand over to Barbara De Micheli and Giovanna Vinghelli. Both are from the Fondazione Giacomo Brodolini, which acted as a supporting partner for 4 of our 7 implementing institutions. And Barbara is head of the social justice unit at the Fondazione. And Giovanna works for the Fondazione and also at the University of Calabria as a teacher and researcher. So Barbara and Giovanna, the floor is yours now.
Thank you, Angela. I'm Giovanna Vinghelli. Good morning and welcome to the first session of the conference. In this first session, we will discuss some experiences from research funding organizations and research performing organizations regarding gender equality interventions and implementation of gender equality plans. In this session, panelists will share with us success stories of how their organization have advanced gender equality in their activities, projects, and within the organization itself. During the conference, we very much welcome feedback from the audience, but please note that we'll only use the chat for collecting your comments and questions, which will be addressed at the end of the session just before the lunch break. The panel will now start with a video by the Target Project focusing on the factors that affect the implementation of gender equality interventions in research and innovation in Europe.
Context and institutional factors facilitating or hindering the implementation of gender equality plans. Target takes a reflexive approach to advance gender equality in 7 institutions in the Mediterranean basin: research performing organizations, research funding organizations, and a network of universities. All countries covered by Target are considered as relatively inactive when it comes to gender equality policies in research and innovation. The implementation of GEPs has been conditioned by diverse institutional and contextual factors. The Hellenic Foundation for European and Foreign Policy in Greece could develop their GEP in a favourable national context due to recent legislative changes when it comes to gender equality.
This is a very propitious time in Greece because there have been important changes in the legislation that encourage organizations to pursue gender equality policies, including to adopt gender equality plans.
The Mediterranean Engineering Schools Network took advantage of the fact that gender equality forms part of the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations.
Since the vision and the mission of the network, Sustainable Development Goals, this is one of the goals. So we combine the statement for gender equality with the whole vision of the network towards sustainable development.
This allows them to push forward gender equality in the network of universities, in spite of great differences in the national contexts.
The national context of European Mediterranean countries favor the creation, last year, favor the creation of gender equality plans because of the existing laws and legislation. The North African countries, the Maghreb countries, then there the national context is different. There we don't have these laws, ministerial laws that oblige or push or help universities and engineering school to start the journey toward changing.
National and institutional contexts include a historic legacy and a dominant culture that can both help to foster gender equality or hinder it.
There is a strong patriarchal tradition here that also has to be taken into account. Another element that has to be taken into account is that we have had, through the period of real socialism, gender equality to a very high level. So that also has become part of this tradition.
For the University of Belgrade and the University Hassan II Casablanca, a key facilitating aspect in GEP implementation was the involvement of people already experienced in gender issues and committed to gender equality as scholars and citizens.
I personally chose to join the Target project as a professor of the University of Belgrade, who has helped establish gender studies as a full program at the University of Belgrade. And since I have been doing that for some time, I thought this was important.
Il y a eu des difficultés, mais quand même, on a réussi en première étape à rassembler quelques potentialités de personnes qui étaient déjà impliquées dans la question d'égalité, que ce soit à l'université ou qui sont universitaires et qui sont impliquées, si vous voulez, dans la société civile. Et ça, c'était un point fort pour moi en tant que coordinatrice.
In the Regional Foundation for Biomedical Research from Italy, GEP implementation was actively supported by the community of scientists.
We are very glad, we are very proud to observe that our issues on gender equality, both through our calls for proposals for fund projects on scientific research, and our events we organized on these issues were very well accepted. There is a lot of interest, a lot of follow-up on these issues. So I think that we are fully committed to continue in these directions, even when Project Target is over.
In turn, the National Agency for Quality Assurance in Higher Education in Romania highlights the role of the institution's staff while implementing the Gender Equality Plan.
Fortunately, it was not difficult to implement the gender equality plan within our institution because everybody, starting from the council, the decision-making body, down to the level of the staff, they were very willing to support us, to help us gather all gender-related data and to actively involve themselves in the planning and implementing the gender equality plan.
Target partner institutions are committed to co-creating a national discourse that will be more favourable to gender equality in research, challenging the barriers they face at the national level.
The project made us start to consider aspects which have not previously been on the agenda, and even uncovered resistances and unconscious biases. And I do hope that because of the Target, the gender equality discourse at national level will start soon.
Transparency, trust, and joy to work together are key aspects for advancing institutional change.
Through transparent communication and collaboration, we created trustful relation, joy, and the feeling that they belong to the same family. So these three cognitive characteristics or parameters really helped very much to go beyond the national context.
Thank you for this video. Welcome back. Now we start with the first panel. As anticipated, it will be about success stories and their context. Just a kind reminder to all the panelists to stick to the agreed timetable for their presentation. And our first panelist is Bente Noll. She's a lecturer at the Vienna University of Technology, at the University of Linz, and the University for Applied Sciences in Vienna. And she's also the manager and researcher at the Büro für Nachhaltige Kompetenz in Austria, partner of the Geecco project. Bente, the floor is yours. Thank you.
So, many thanks. May I just have a short feedback if you can see my screen?
Perfect.
Thank you for that. So I'm very happy to present to you one of the success stories coming from the Chico project. And I will talk about the Chico do's and don'ts. So that is one of our results we are right now working on. And the do's and don'ts are a guideline for and including recommendations such as do's and don'ts while degendering the STEM field. Our aim is really to provide practical recommendations and practical tips for universities, research performing organizations in the field of STEM, in order to support them when they go on improving gender equality in their organizations. And let me first start with some more characteristics. What are the specific characteristics in the STEM field? Some of the basics have already been presented by Brigitte. And I will just highlight some more really characteristics within the STEM field. So we know that in the STEM field, they really face a lack of knowledge from social sciences, gender studies, and organizational science. So that's really one of the main issues in the STEM field that often discourses and research results coming from other fields than the engineering are really neglected, and that also leads to the fact that gender studies are not seen as part of the scientific surrounding and environment. We still have in the STEM field a strong belief in meritocracy, and gender and social disadvantages are not acknowledged as they should. We also, and you are probably all aware of that, that we really still face a strong underrepresentation of women. So the numerical minority of women, people considered as women in the STEM field, is still very huge. So, but that does not only apply to top positions in research, but also in top leadership positions in management. So that is really one main issue that really is one characteristic in the STEM field. The STEM field is also quite close to an organizational culture that is strongly still oriented on attendance culture, excessive working hours, and that is really also probably one of the main characteristics in the STEM field. STEM field is also quite still several gender stereotypes are quite common in the STEM field, and typical gender stereotypes such as men are technically and scientifically gifted and women are not at all. So that is really some subtitle and gender stereotypes that come obvious and vicious in the STEM field at various occasions. And our guideline that we are preparing, do's and don'ts, while degendering the STEM field, has one main aim. We really, on one hand, build on the results of the Chico project, and the aim of the guideline is to summarize tips and recommendations when implementing gender equality actions and measures in the STEM field. And in order to really give some practical tips and recommendations, we decided that we will structure our do's and don'ts alongside the acronym of Geecco. As you have heard before, Chico stands for Gender Equality in Engineering through Communication and Commitment. And our do's and don'ts will be structured along these, acronyms and these overall approaches. And now I will present to you just briefly 2 or 3 components of the do's and don'ts. So, and I will start with engineering. We have collected several do's and don'ts that are really specifically tackling the engineering. So it is really crucial to make the gender-related body of literature accessible to lecturers, researchers, and decision makers in the STEM field. We have heard already there is gender-related literature around. One main problem is that really a big part of the body of literature is not part within the scientific and academic literature. So we also face a lot of gray literature. So, and that it's really necessary to translate these findings also to the researchers in order to help the researchers to reflect and rethink theories, methods, and hypotheses from a gender perspective. When it comes to research per se, it's also important to apply participatory and gender-sensitive methods and research approaches. And what is an important don't in the STEM field is not to develop gender stereotypical technology solutions. And that is really a huge challenge within the STEM field, and especially in the engineering. Quite often when people want to implement gender perspectives, gender dimension in their research, then it sometimes happens that they develop gender stereotypical solutions. And it's really very important to point out that the main aim of gender equality is to overcome gender stereotypes. Let me now continue with the second C of Geecco. So it's about commitment. And especially in the STEM field, it's really important to, again, rely on the gender equality principles and strategies that have already been developed on the national as well as on the European level. We have, we have heard about that earlier, and especially in the STEM field, it is really important to really always point out the GE principles that have already been developed, and that it is not just fun for some people who are engaged in gender equality, but it's more about really implementing and sticking to European and national legislation and rules and guidelines. It's important to build up your gender equality team at the level of your organization and involve friendly allies at various stages. And to involve those allies, it's not only about your organization in an engineering research performing organization, but it's also about building up relationships and supporting structures beyond your organization, and to use also make use of people who are engaging in gender equality in STEM field. Share good practice from other comparable RPOs in the STEM field, and really addressing top managers and top decision makers. That is also one of our do's that we emphasize on when it comes to implementing gender equality in the STEM field. So, and looking at the don'ts, it is, again, as we know from gender mainstreaming and gender equality practice all over Europe, it is really important not to forget to ensure a formal commitment, including a clear mandate from gender equality from the top management, and that also includes the resources that are really needed, not only one time but permanent resources for the implementing gender equality. Yeah, and keeping to my time frame, I would like to thank you, and I'm happy to discuss with you via the chat. And let me point out our email, our URL, and we will be happy to share the guideline do's and don'ts by the end of the project with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Bente. Now go to our second panelist, Dia Anagnostou, Assistant Professor of Politics at Pantheon University in Athens. She's also Senior Research Fellow at the Hellenic Foundation for European and Foreign Policy, partner of the Targets project.
So good morning, everyone. I'm Dia Anagnostou from Eliamep, and I will briefly share with you some initial reflections on what are some of the factors that seem to promote or constrain the development of gender equality plans in research and higher education entities in the Mediterranean countries that are partners in the Target project. I will also lay out some broad brush recommendations, which we're still in the process of developing. So you've already heard about the Target project from the presentation by Angela earlier. So in the Target project, we've worked with very different organizations. Some are small research institutes, others are large high education entities. Some fund research, others engage, implement research. So the challenges each has faced and the complexity of the task and the goals have greatly varied. So because I have a very limited amount of time,
sorry to interrupt you. Can you set in presentation mode, please?
Yes.
Thank you.
Have I done so? I haven't done anything.
It's okay. Please go on, dear.
Yeah.
Okay. Now it's
okay. So I will discuss these factors that undermine or support gender mainstreaming and the development of gender equality plans by dividing them up. First talking about national context factors, and then go on to talk about organizational level factors that are enabling or constraining. First of all, gender equality is not a central priority in research and innovation policy in any of the target countries. But you do have significant differences where in some cases, legal provisions or policy initiatives have boosted the importance of gender equality in research, innovation and higher education. And the example of Greece and the Hellenic Foundation of European Foreign Policy was already mentioned earlier, where in the course of the project in Greece, the establishment of gender equality committees in universities has really highlighted the importance of gender equality plans and introduced strong motivation. Obviously, needless to say, here the horizon requirement for participating institutions to have a gender equality plan is a watershed, and it's already making a big difference and impact in pushing forward the importance of gender equality plan. Thirdly, the development of a gender equality discourse, which this is very much, there is a lot to be done here. And not that a gender equality discourse does not exist, but what is necessary is to develop it further in a way that it is compatible with the idea and policy of gender mainstreaming. What we have seen in the target institutions is the prevalence of a formal conception of equality. I think it was mentioned before in one of the presentations, where a relative numerical balance among men and women exists in some of the target institutions, there tends to be denial or resistance to the idea that there is an issue of gender equality to be dealt with. There is lack of a substantive conception of gender equality that that emphasizes indirect inequalities, implicit biases, these are harder to explain and prove, especially when you don't, in the lack of sex disaggregated data. Another national level factor is the absence or weakness of active civil society and stakeholders to help diffuse gender equality discourse and to rally support for gender mainstreaming. Now let me talk a little bit about institution level factors. First of all, the limited, what we see is in most target institutions, limited organizational capacity and gender expertise. And there's a lot to say here, but I don't have the time to really develop this. It is a key constraint in the development of gender equality plans. Secondly, the lack of sex disaggregated data, the lack of systematic data collection processes, and even a lack of an understanding as to why such data is important to record. I think this is tied up with a broader constraint, namely the limited development of, if I can say, a new public management culture, setting goals, implementing actions to achieve those goals, monitoring how effective these actions are, and so on. While this may be familiar in universities or research organizations in West European countries, it is far less entrenched in the Mediterranean countries. Thirdly, a well-developed research program or study program on gender studies can make a difference at the organizational level, and across the board, support from top management has been enabling or constraining, and this will be essential for the sustainability of gender equality plans. Now, briefly, in the few minutes that I have, some reflections on policy recommendations, which we have not developed, but think that in what direction these can be developed. First of all, the EU level, recommendations to EU level, to the European Commission. There is plenty of space for further action here to promote the engagement of civil society and to help develop and diffuse a substantive conception of equality in research and innovation. Both at the national and the EU level, resources are necessary, especially for training and further capacity building activities. At the national level, any incentive or acts of official will would be crucial to encourage the support of top management in research organizations and universities to develop effective action plans. For example, to include the existence of a GEP as a criterion in university evaluation and accreditation systems, or more broadly to highlight gender equality as a value in government policy. Finally, at the organizational level, some organizations that are participants in the target project can be and have acted, some of them, as drivers and multipliers in the development of a broader gender equality discourse. This is it, and I will be happy to have feedback on all of this from the audience. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dia, for your presentation. And now we start with the second part of the session, focusing, as anticipated, on the specific experiences from research funding organization and research performing organization. First presenter is Donia Lassinger, Deputy Managing Director of the Vienna Science and Technology Funds, partner of the Geecco project. Thank you.
Okay. So let me just briefly explain how we as a research funding organization kind of did this change, this cultural change for implementing gender in our organization. And for understanding that and really briefly give a glimpse about it, I would quickly say who we are, because this is actually really important. And we've seen it in the presentations before, the surrounding the context, the national context, and also the context the organization is really, really important. So just a very short introduction who we are. We are a private regional non-profit funding organization. We are quite small and we're only concentrating on Vienna, but our mission is really to support excellent scientific research in very thematic priorities and to really operate in a niche. And our main focus is also on the STEM kind of field, what we heard already today. So what our focus is really, we're small, and I would say we are flexible, and we're flexible. So this is the good and the positive and the negative aspect I was also stressed in the following things that I would like to tackle. But we are embedded in a wider context, and this is also quite helpful. At the start of Geecco, I have to say that we had individual measures in place for gender mainstreaming and gender, but there was no systematic approach to it. And what we did throughout the 4 years of the gender project is, first of all, we started with a very in-depth analysis of best practices. And we collected examples of around 20 other research funding organizations, mostly in Europe, and to really draw lessons learned from them. And this was really helpful, to know what's going on out there. And then what we did is we also looked inside and said, okay, what can we take from these lessons learned and really adapt them to our internal needs, to our internal context. And what we did, and I won't go into detail, but we installed a more detailed monitoring. We made a lot of awareness raising internally in teams and also in our boards, in our decision bodies. We also installed a new criterion, gendering content, and also focusing on gendering teams. And what was really most of the work really was to inform externally to our applicants about the changes and what we really want them to do, but also to have a really intense information in-house for our boards, but also our jury members to really use this criterion in the way we would like them to do. And just to jumping to the supporting and hindering factors, and I stressed before that we had a very special kind of situation. First of all, we are a private organization. So this is positive because we have fewer restrictions than public research funding organizations. But jumping to the other side, to the hindering factors, it also means that private does not really automatically mean that we have to fulfill the requirements, the laws. So for example, we don't have to install the quota. Supporting was we were not a first mover. So we were embedded in a context with other organizations, bigger public research funding organizations who already have paved the way, who tried things out, and who were also observers in our project. And this was very, very helpful. And we also drew a lot of examples from the evidence that we're collecting with the interviews and the questionnaire we did with these 20 other funding organizations. And this was really helpful to know what's going out there and to collect like data that we have to change. This brings me to the supporting factor about the smallness. So smallness is really, we're flexible. We're a small team, we're 8 people, which is quite nice. If you want to install this kind of a new approach, then you just have to convince a few people. But on the other hand, these few people could also have a very high weight. So you really need to convince them anyway. What also helped us in doing this change was to take a holistic approach. So not just to want to do one thing, but to really look at the whole funding cycle, also to reach sustainability and to implement the measures to spanning an entire call. And when we reached that, and we started with a pilot call and we're successful, and we also now included in our other calls that are going on, which is really a success, I would say. And jumping to the hindering factors, the first one I have already mentioned, and also depicting the small organization aspect is also a kind of a hindering factor, because on one side we have little room for bigger structures. We don't have the capacity to have a gender team or to have a kind of group to look at it, we have to do it besides other things that we normally have to do, and the resources are limited. And also what is very obvious, it really depends also on the individual engagement to drive the change. And this brings me actually to the last point about the lessons learned. What we learned in these 4 years is RFOs, they play a role in gender equality, but the context matters. So it matters if you're a public or a private organization, how big you are, in which kind of context you're situated, how much money you have available, how many resources, also the political context, it really, really matters. And also the fact if you're more on the basic kind of research or maybe more on the applied side, all these matters. The next one is it's really important to set the scene. So to have the internal knowledge and to really convince and raise the awareness of the colleagues to prevent resistance. And monitoring here was really helpful to get the numbers right and to really look, what are we talking about? What kind of evidence is there? And this is also important for the look outside to really get the evidence, as mentioned before, that there is need for action and what others are doing. So we use this look outside also to have this network, to have this exchange with experiences from other ones, and to also have the exchange between our project partners, between funding agencies and research institutions, which we saw is important, but unfortunately less often and informal. And this implementing change in a pilot initiative was really the door opener to have this window of opportunity, even if it's not everything is like perfect, but to really start and to learn while you're doing things. This was very helpful. And I will end with this, just pointing out we have a set of resources targeting research funding organizations, and happy to answer them questions later on. Thank you.
Thank you, Donia. Now I give the floor to our next presenter, Jana Dvorakova, Technology Agency of the Czech Republic, partner of the Geecco project.
My name is Jana Dvorakova, as you already know, and I'm a gender expert in the Technology Agency of the Czech Republic. And together with my colleague Marcel Kraus, we've been implementing various gender equality measures as part of the Geecco project. Just to briefly, or to introduce in brief our organization. Well, the Technology Agency of the Czech Republic is a public, nationwide research funding organization. It supports applied research and innovation. And currently it has about 160 employees. Although it became active in promoting gender equality already 7 years ago, its activities have transformed into a complex whole only thanks to the project Geecco. If I should now briefly summarize our main achievements, probably the most important would be the introduction of the gender dimension in research content as part of the evaluation of proposals. So far, we have introduced the gender dimension as an evaluation criterion in 2 of our funding programs. It means that around 900 research teams had to consider sex and gender analysis in their proposal. We also started to focus on gender balance in the research team as part of the evaluation of proposals. Besides, we developed a system for motivating RPOs to launch changes for gender equality, which means introduce jobs, apply for HR award in HR Excellence in Research Award, monitor gender pay gaps, etc. And we aim to transfer all these measures to our new framework program, Sigma. In addition, we developed a guideline for promoting gender equality in the evaluation process, and we also developed a system for data collection and monitoring various gender relevant parameters concerning the applicants and the evaluation process, etc. Well, these achievements would not probably be possible without several facilitating factors. Unfortunately, not all of them are transferable to other environments, but First of all, I would like to mention that we have an organizational culture valuing mutual respect, which is probably related to the fact that preparation and implementation of funding programs and calls is a collective activity where people with diverse expertise have to cooperate and find compromises. I think this is something very different from the environment in RPOs. What also helped us, I believe, is the fact that the implementation of gender equality measures is a part of a project, and in fact, it is our first EU-funded project. So the need to successfully implement the project has further stimulated the cooperation. Another factor is that the technology agency self-defines as a modern organization. There's some, let's say, pro-innovation ethos, and because we support innovations, we are also open to them, I would say. What is of key importance is that we have relative support from the management, and they are quite open to gender issues. And I would also like to mention the fact that another factor is the fact of being networked with other actors and foreign RFOs involved in similar activities, because we are, for example, a member of the GenderNet Plus Consortium. And to hindering factors, well, the Czech Republic is a relatively inactive environment in terms of its policies for promoting gender equality in research and higher education. Overall, the technology agency belongs to the first funders in the CEE region involved in this kind of activities. So due to this situation and the situation of a relative absence of support from above, the legitimacy of our actions for promoting gender equality has often been questioned. And it has been a source of resistances on the part of our coworkers, and it has also brought our organization considerable visibility, not always seen as positive. And some evaluators complained or even terminated their cooperation with us. And this, of course, in turn, increased the resistances on the part of our coworkers. So we sometimes felt a bit isolated in our activities. And because we were asked by the organizers to think about one piece of advice for the institutions just starting this journey, if I should talk to another institution from a country with less support from above, I would have two very elementary pieces of advice. They are not very original, but I must say that they are validated by our experience. And the first of them would be that when designing new measures or evaluation criteria, take inspiration from a precise design used by some other organization, because it will help you increase the perceived legitimacy of the measure and eliminate the uncertainty your organization may feel about its implementation. And the second one would be to build alliances with external actors, because it will help you show your management and your colleagues why gender equality is a serious issue and an important aim that your organization should be involved in. So it is probably all from my side. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Jana. Our next presenter is Paola Bello, EU Project Officer of the Regional Foundation for Biomedical Research in Italy.
So good morning, everyone. My name is Paola Bello. I am European Funding Officer at Fondazione Regionale per la Ricerca Biomedica. And thank you for your invitation today. We are glad that we are here to share some of our experiences. So we are a regional funding agency focused in biomedical sciences. Since the beginning of our participation in the Target project, we started to work on the topic of gender equality, and we achieved some milestones. One of them, the first of them, was the draft and approval of our gender equality plan. The first version of the gender equality plan was realized in 2018. We made a first revision in 2019, and we are planning to update it once again this year. As I said, we are a regional funding agency, so we launch every year some calls for proposals. Thanks to that, we were able to introduce in the course of the years some specific provisions that help the implementation of gender equality. So first of all, in a call dedicated to early career researchers, we introduced the possibility to request an extension of the eligibility period for maternity or paternity leave. In another call, we explicitly introduced measures to encourage the participation of women PIs. In our call for proposals, we also try to collect data from the organizations that apply to our grants. Most of what we have done so far could have not been realized without the constant involvement of a community of practice, which is a group made by researchers, university staff, healthcare staff that really follows us in our work in the Target project and in what we are doing for gender equality. Thanks to the participation of a COP, to their request, to their needs, we were really able to work to make a lot of progress over the course of these years. And we also are working to make the results that we obtained sustainable and make sure that they will go beyond the Target project. So some key support factors and some hindering issues. So we are also a small funding agency, but we are also very committed to work towards this topic. One thing that really supported us in the last few months was the COP. Making sure that we have a community of practice engaged is what really helps us to move forwards. The COP really asks us to do more, to work on specific topic. They tell us what their needs are, especially if they're coming from universities or hospitals. So having a strong COP engagement is really a key support factor. Another key support factor is definitely a strong management support. Without a strong management support, we couldn't have done what we have done so far. But thanks to the management support, we are sure that every step we take has a strong basis. So management support was really and is really a key. When it comes to the hindering factors, well, first of all, in particular in small organizations like ours, time is a hindering factor. The moment you start working on gender equality, you start collecting data, you start having conversations with the COP and with other people, you realize that it takes time. So creating time for this specific activity is an issue, but it's a very important issue to tackle. The other hindering factors are, of course, resistances, and resistances can be met everywhere, especially and also in small groups. Of course, we didn't meet people saying, I do not want gender equality, or I'm not interested in gender equality. But we did meet people saying, I don't have time for this. The situation is not that bad. Why should we change? So sometimes resistances are very strong and at the same time very subtle. So there's a lot of work to be done there. If we were asked to give an advice to institutions who just started this journey, their work towards gender equality. So first of all, the first advice would be collect data. Collect data on your own organization, collect data on the organizations you work with. Try to check what are the numbers, how many men, how many women, in which role. Are there specific provisions in place in your organization to fight discrimination or to encourage a more inclusive participation? Start a dialogue. Start a dialogue with your management. Start a dialogue with your colleagues. Try to understand how much support you need to move forward and how much support you have so far. Having a dialogue, it's a good starting point. And finally, challenge it all.
challenge a system that may work for some, but not for everyone. Challenge the resistances, challenge the management. Maybe you have a management which is not unfamiliar with the topic, but still has decided not to commit itself that much. And challenge yourself. Even if you're working on gender equality and if you think you are on the right side, sometimes we all have some biases. So challenge also your own opinion and be open to listen to the other needs. So challenge it all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paola. Our last panelist is Awatif Ayar, President of the University Hassan II in Casablanca.
So just I would say that at University Hassan II, we have been very happy to join this project. So as an emerging African country, not European, so this was an opportunity for us to open a debate around equality at the university, and also to bring together people who are interested and who are already working around this issue in other forums, especially some are members of civil society. Also to know the actual situation regarding equality at the university. So we collected many data. And after 3 institutional workshops, we have adopted a charter and by the higher instance in the university, the University Council. So this charter formulates a general commitment on of university to increase women's participation in decision making and fight all forms of discrimination. And the chart also invites all institutions of the university to implement a set of measures to promote gender equality. Also, we worked on the perception of colleagues, to know the perception of colleagues about gender equality. So we elaborate 2 surveys, and this work was set up in a national context. This context where we have a declared policy for changing the situation of women in Morocco, and that was in the new Article 19 of the Constitution in 2011, which established the principle of equality between men and women. And there were also many legislative reforms that have contributed to greater equality between men and women. Progress as regards this legal equality between men and women is slow, and in the society there are traditional gender stereotypes and apparent gender inequality which persist in society. But in our work we target that allows us to know that the situation in the university and the most problem that we notice that it's about women teacher and researcher. Women account only for 30% of teaching staff in the lowest university position, but only 18 of full professors. They are not visible in the management of university. We had only among 14 universities, we had only 1 female as president. But since 2019, we had the president at the university, at University Hassan II, and another one in University of Setat.
We noticed also that there are new appointments of women in position of responsibility as vice dean or secretary or department heads. And also there were more candidatures of women in the election in various universities. But we are aware that it is not sufficient, and we should also address our interest to gender content in curricula. And we intend to take opportunity of actual intention of Ministry of Education to establish new system of training in the university is the bachelor. In this new system, the first 2 years would be devoted to strengthening soft skills, and in this context, we will organize a webinar to discuss the possibility of introducing transversal training module on gender. We thanks. I would thank the coordinator and our partners to give us this possibility to work in target projects, and we intend to continue because over the projects because we are intending actually to constitute local commission in every institution of the university, and to continue to implement the gender equality plan. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Amina. Now we start with the discussion of the panel, and I leave the floor to my colleague Barbara De Micheli.
Thank you very much. I would like to thank the people that are going to join us for this second session. And I will also ask you if it would be fine for you to take a little bit more time than the scheduled, and so to aim to close, let's say 10 to 15 minutes after 12. Because we are a little bit late, we have a lot of people that we would like to hear. So if it's fine, I would like to schedule the discussion until 12:15. If I'm not going to, let's say, if I'm not going to see any very negative comments on the chat, I will take it for a yes, and that you will be available to stay with us until 12:15. Okay, so in the meanwhile, I would like to thank, the aim of the second part is first to collect feedback from 4 panelists that we have invited to discuss with us the lesson learned. And then we will try to open the floor and get from the participants in the first part of this morning and from our panelists some answers on key questions we consider crucial for the adoption and implementation of the JEPs. So I would like to welcome our panelists, and I would like to ask them to give a first feedback on what they have heard. The first person I would like to invite to talk is Athanasia Mongu, EC officer from the Directorate General for Research and Innovation. So please, Athanasia, if you want to give us in a few minutes, your feedback on what you have heard. Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara, and good morning. My feedback so far, it's very positive. I think that it's very important also to have the concrete outcomes of the project, in the sense of what went well, what were the challenges, what could also be improved. And also the reason that we're also here is to listen to you and to listen to your recommendations on how to improve also things for Horizon Europe. So it's great to already learn so much about the outcomes of the projects.
Okay, so thank you very much also for being so, pointing on the timing. And I would like to invite Marcela Linkova, chair of the ERAC Standing Working Group on Gender in Research and Innovation, to give us her feedback and also some insights for the future of the gender equality plans in the research and innovation projects.
Okay, good morning. I think I will take a little more time than Athanasia because what I want to share with you is the first results of a survey that we're doing in the Standing Working Group on JEP implementation at member state level. So I will share my screen for a little bit. I'll just put it in. Okay, you should be seeing that now. So we launched a survey recently about the uptake of gender equality plans in member states and associated countries. And here is a really stark first visual input at where we are. And you can see that we have really a very clear-cut widening divide in the EU in terms of where gender equality plans are implemented and mandatory. That's the most important thing, mandatory in member states and associated countries. In Germany and Belgium, the gender equality plans are required at regional level. There's no national requirement. There are new developments in the Netherlands, so it is estimated that there will be a requirement very soon. And then you have the countries where the gender equality plan is not a requirement. And clearly there are other developments going on. It's not that nothing is happening, although there are a few countries where nothing is happening. And countries are using different instruments such as support centers or dedicated funding or experts. But really in terms of the requirement for a gender equality plan, we can see a difference. And this will of course have impact on how countries can participate in Horizon Europe. We also asked our members about the needs that are there in terms of JEP implementation. And I think the interesting thing is that in terms of the divide between the countries that have the JEP requirement and do not, we can see that countries that do not have a JEP requirement, they have voiced much more strongly the need for expertise and capacity building from the EU level compared to the countries that have a JEP requirement already in place. And then we can see that all the countries across board would really welcome to have mutual learning exercises and exchanges at institutional level, as well as opportunities to research the impact of JEPs in the era. And this is something that I think we will need to think about collectively how to do. We have also asked about the challenges, and so please bear with me, because I think that this speaks to a lot of the points that were made at the beginning, for example, by Angela, but also by the other speakers. One of the most important things that we are coming away from the survey with is that we need a common definition of the JEP requirement. We still do not have that. The Commission will have one for Horizon Europe, but this is by no means an overall definition that everyone is working with, and we really need to develop this. The second issue that we have identified is that we really need to build a common political consensus about what gender equality means in the EU and what the JEPs are in order to achieve substantive changes through gender equality plans. Also, countries are lacking information about the uptake, about how many institutions are actually implementing gender equality plans. There is monitoring in some countries, especially the countries where there is a legislative requirement, but overall, we do not really know at national level of the national authorities how many institutions are implementing RPOs, with the exception of a few countries. Next issue is monitoring and evaluation. There's a huge recognition that even if there is a requirement, we don't know at the level of national authorities what the institutions are really doing and whether it goes beyond the piece of paper on which it is written. So we really need to develop a robust monitoring and evaluation mechanism at the EU level. There is a need for capacity building, that's clear. Also mobilize support and resources at the member state level so that the national governments provide further support for JEP implementation. This cannot be done simply by the European Commission. There is a need for mutual learning also among the civil servants about the people in the national authorities. And then the last thing that came out is sometimes there are requirements that are applicable to the private sector that are not necessarily translated to the public sector, higher education. And so we should start a discussion about the commensurability of the JEP requirements between the public and private sectors. So this is all from me for the time being. I thought that it might be useful for you to know where we are now in the standing working group. And I think that these findings speak very closely to what has been said here. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. I would remind you, as Maria has already did in the chat, that if you want to ask any questions to the panelists or to the people that talked before, just put it in the chat and then we will share it. So use the chat to put to share your questions. And then I will ask Maya Widmer from the Gemma Widmer, former head of gender equality and research at the SNSF, to share with us her comments and eventually insights for the future of gender equality plans.
Yeah, my feedback is very short. I would like to congratulate the two projects, what they actually achieved. And it's been wonderful to see these rich presentations about the achievements and the challenges. And I think it's quite crucial that there is resources, meaning also, and maybe in the first, financial resources to do projects like this, who help to implement gender equality plans at institutions. We've seen that through the SWAFs, quite a lot of institutions actually have been able to implement these JEPs.
Okay, thank you very much. And I would ask now to Roberta Schallersteld, head of the Department of Gender and Diversity at the Austrian Federal Ministry for Education, Science and Research, to share with us her feedback and also to give us some insights for future implementation.
Yes, hello. I also would like to start with my congratulations to both consortiums, what they have achieved, and also for the practical information, which is really helpful for me as a policymaker. And I'm really convinced that it is important that these results and these outcomes and the experiences should be integrated in our considerations how to support at national level higher education and research institutions, and also the non-university sector in this process to prepare gender equality plans. And I really appreciate Marcella's presentation, and because it is also, it shows that we have to focus on the European level, on the national level, but also on the institutional level. And it is also important that we come to a common definition of gender equality. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So while we'll we have positive comments, but still no questions, except if we can, a question to Marcela, if the report can be available and can be shared, or where can be seen, so that we can have a deeper look on it. And while the question maybe come up with the chat, I would like to ask both to our panelists and also to the speakers to the previous session to answer to a first question. I think we already had some inputs both from Marcela and Roberta. The question is how European policy and national levels initiative can support gender equality implementation. So if you have any suggestions or examples that go behind what we have already heard. I don't know who in the panel wants to comment on this.
I can perhaps go first, because this is also usually the problem when you're the first speaker. You don't know what to say at the beginning, so I was very brief. So I would just like to say that gender equality plans is not something new, and the European Commission has been funding these JEP projects for quite some time now. And all the work that has been implemented from our JEP projects has been really a catalyzer for actions at national level. And this is also all the success that came up from our JEP projects basically brought us here, and at this point where we are now, where gender equality plans will become an eligibility criterion for Horizon Europe. So also in line with what Marcela said, and of course also Roberta and Maya, is the gender equality plans on their own are not enough also for achieving institutional change without actions at the national level. So that means that we also need a comprehensive gender equality strategy, and also at the institutional level. That is also at the very high management level to visibly promote gender equality and being committed. So at least from the European Commission side, what we would like to do is to work on closing the widening gap on gender, and of course to leave no one behind. And I also heard the comments and the presentations that basically, especially to make sure not to increase the widening gap among less and more advanced countries towards gender equality. And this also brings us to the area communication, because now we have a common action between the Commission and also the member states and the relevant stakeholders. Gender equality plans is a common action for all of us. And also from our side, we have already a pilot support facility that has already become operational since the beginning of March, with exactly the same to provide advice and give support to member states and the organizations. So of course, we will have also more funding for specific actions towards gender equality, and all this will also be more clear when the work programs will be released in mid-April.
Okay, thank you very much. Does anyone else want to add on this? Because otherwise we have already questions on more on the gender equality plans. Okay, because I mean, the second question we would like to pose was about how gender equality plans can effectively enhance the 3 ERA objectives, so careers, decision making, and gender dimension. But there was at the same time some comments in the chat about the first point of Marcela's presentation, the need to have a common definition of gender equality plan. And there are some comments saying that sometimes it's complicated because the contexts are very different, and so how we could deal with this, and also who should take the lead of let's say a common definition. So I don't know if you want to reply on this or comment on this.
I will. So one of the first steps is next week. There will be a workshop organized by the ERAC committee, where the gender equality plans are the main topic for discussion. And the ERAC delegates, which is the representatives of member states, national authorities, will discuss how ministries, the responsible authorities can support JEP implementation at national level. I will be presenting the draft of our report there as well. And we will see what comes out of it. I hope that we will be able to find a common ground how to start a discussion about a common definition, and whether the member states will join the Commission in the definition that is put forward, or how this could be done to facilitate. But even with the Commission definition and the building blocks and the priority topics in the ERA that we have currently, I still do not think that this is enough, and it goes very much in line with what Angela Wroblewski has been saying. Even if we have defined topics, it does not ensure that we will have a critical definition of gender equality in place that people will work with. There's always the danger that it will be squished to work-life balance issues only, for example, or women-focused issues. So we really need to insist and focus on getting a broad definition of gender equality in the EU Pact for Research and Innovation that will be prepared now by member states and the Commission. It should be the document that will orient the values of European research for the upcoming period in the ERA. And it is one of the big challenges and tasks that I see for us in the Standing Working Group for the upcoming period, to make sure that gender equality is reflected properly in the EU Pact for Research and Innovation.
Okay, very interesting answer. And also very, interesting to know that there will be a discussion in the next week, so that we will know more quite shortly. Is there anyone else that wants to comment on this? Because in the chat discussions go ahead, so I have no time, unfortunately, to bring everything back. But if someone also from the panelists and from the speakers wants to comment on this, you are welcome to participate in the discussion.
Yeah, I totally agree with Marcella that kind of guidelines, how the JEPs, what they should actually contain is really very important. But to me, one crucial thing is that checking, the JEPs really thoroughly, whether the institutions are actually just ticking a box or implementing JEPs which fits the respective needs. That is, for me, that's the crucial thing. Yeah, and I bring to you some of the things that are emerging in the chat. One issue is about budget, that not all the countries are investing the same amount of budget for gender equality plans. In some cases, they are cutting budgets, so it might be difficult for all countries to have the same objectives and aims. And another question is also about more advanced, less advanced countries, and if some targets would be too difficult from some countries, or on the other side, too easy to reach for countries that are already advanced. So I think that this is more for you to bring it to the table, and I guess you already have it in mind, but this is the contribution from the chat on this argument. And I don't know if you can give us some examples or insights about how the gender equality plans effectively can contribute to the 3 ERA objectives, so careers, decision making, and gender dimension. If you have any, additional examples from the ones that you have seen from partners in the 2 projects, or any suggestions for the future also.
So I would like to give you an insight from the Austrian perspective. In Austria, most of the majority of the higher education institutions have legal obligations to adopt gender equality plans. And we have this instrument in place since the first one were introduced in 1995. So we have a lot of experience, but we also have higher education institutions with a requirement, with a legal requirement, and they are at the beginning to develop gender equality plans. And these are the universities of applied sciences. And we have public research institutions without legal requirements, but with requirements like the performance agreements. And what we can say is that gender equality plans as an instrument alone is not enough, even at public universities, because the instrument should be connected with other strategic instruments and with steering instruments like the performance agreements. This is not the case at public universities, and we also have to improve these gender equality plans that we link them with these instruments and to monitor them regularly. And this is what my message is. We have to improve in CHAPs which are already established, and we have to give support to institutions which are in the process to develop CHAPs. And the European requirements are important, but also the standing working group has an important role, and even the national delegates to the standing working group, because they are the translator what happens at European level and bring this information at national level and build up a national network to distribute this information, this knowledge, and to work with an engaged network and bundle all the expertise and knowledge at national level together with the commitment of the ministry and the stakeholder and the management level of the institution to bring this project, this CHAP project forward.
Thank you for your suggestions. From the chat, I bring to you some additional suggestions. One comes from Rachel Palmer from Notus, that says that one interesting approach could be to tailor it to different realities. So to have the existence of a JEP, the implementation of the JEP, and the evaluation as key steps, and then could be adapted to the different realities, if I get it right. There is a suggestion for, in order to overcome the issue of the checking the box risk, to a proposition for a certification, as they are doing in the Casper project. And then, another comments stress on the importance of the community of practice as a way of sharing information and knowledge among partners. And then we have a comment on another, let's say, a little bit different perspective, which is a comment on the fact that we are still using the term
equality instead of equity. And I don't know if any of you wants to comment on this. The comment says, I'm a bit astonished that the term equality is still broadly used instead of equity, especially in STEM. It can make a big difference. So I don't know if any one of you wants to answer on this. Okay.
Actually, I'd like to raise another point, because having seen for quite different countries in establishing or advancing their CHAPs, I think, as we all know, paper is very patient. So the process of implementation is difficult and slow. And the universities, they are existing within societies and not as separate entities. So it's kind of myth to have the idea that if we have the right recipe for the perfect gender equality plan, then you can install within research performing organizations or universities the perfect gender world that doesn't have any interferences with the outside world. So I think it is very crucial that at the political level, like at the EU level, the discussions are brought forward. Even if the universities are some sort of avant-garde, it's not sort of the island of the blissful, and it doesn't have any interconnection with other parts of society, and specifically with as we have seen in Europe now, with countries that are really not only lagging behind but also walking to the other direction actually. And I think that if politics does not react on that, then there is no chance at the institutional level to lever that.
Thank you very much for your comment. Yeah, I think that we also experienced this in our project, in the target project. So I agree with you. And we have a last question that I don't know if any of you wants to comment on, is how the experience gained in these structural projects can be transferred to the institutions that are starting a gender equality plan now. We had some recommendation from the two projects coordinators at the beginning. We had some insights from our project partners. So do you think that this and how this experience could be beneficial for the organizations that are starting now their process?
Maybe I can just come back to that question. Thank you for the question. And especially the do's and don'ts coming from the Chico project, they really have the aim to support also the newcomers. So it's our really our main aim that we develop a guideline with concrete and precise recommendations based on the experiences of the Chico project in order to support and help new organizations who really start with the process of equality or equity.
Yeah.
If I can jump in, I think transferring experiences in structural change projects to institutions starting such a journey is probably the most difficult part. But of course, when I see, and I know the Geecco better than Target, that all these workshops, videos, reports with good practices and step-by-step recommendations for setting up a JEP is really very helpful. But it's also clear that all these JEPs, and I mean this also if the European Commission finds a common agreement on what a JEP should entail, it must be tailored to the needs and the gaps of the respective institution.
And if I may also add on this and on what Maya and Bent said, basically, one of the outcomes of the Target project is the monitoring tool that you came up with, also with the self-assessment part. And this is also what we're talking about, having the foundation and then also tailoring a JEP according to the needs of its institution. And of course, something else that I noted is the communities of practice that you manage to have within its organization, within its institution. So this is very important also to have good communication and basically have a place where you can also discuss and find solutions for problems. And also for the Geecco project, what is also important, I really like how active Geecco is in terms of the videos that are produced, as well in terms of also integrating the gender dimension into research and teaching content. So this is also one of the recommended areas that should be covered by JEPs. And all this material is very important also for dissemination and raising awareness on the importance of integrating the gender dimension into research content. It's also a matter of scientific excellence.
Can I also say, make if I may, a last comment?
Please, yeah.
This is all extremely valuable and very, very relevant what we've heard about the JEPs. I was wondering, it's a comment and it's also a question, even though we're running out of time. What's the role of civil society in other countries that are more ahead, like in Austria, for example? Is it only in some of the Mediterranean target countries where the civil society has not really taken up the issue of gender inequalities in research and innovation? It's sort of, they've mobilized around, you know, gender-based violence, around issues like sexual harassment a lot, but gender inequalities in research, higher education and innovation have not really come in the interest of civil society. I don't know if there is any different experience from another country. You know, we talk about community of practice, but really you need broader support within, from stakeholders and the broader actors.
I can highlight the example of Switzerland. All Swiss universities have a JEP since 2013. And it was because the JEP has been a precondition for funding gender equality measures. And this, of course, helped quite a lot. But also we had the advantage of being a very small country with a community of practice from different institutions who was and still is quite active. And it was really this pushing from the bottom, but also the Swiss National Science Foundation as a research funding organization took a leading role in helping to have more gender equality in its funding instruments. And this was always a very good practice for, you know, seeing the universities, oh, the Swiss National Science Foundation wants or does this or that, and this helped a lot.
Okay, so, well, thank you for the questions, thank you for the answers. I think we are reaching our closing for this first part of the day. There are a lot of comments also in the chat. Unfortunately, I cannot take them all, but I mean, there are comments about getting alliances with the feminist movements. There are comments about introducing sanctions, because without sanctions, compulsory measures could not work.
and a lot of more. The chat is really running, but I think we are all a little bit in need of rest and food. I have a recommendation from the organizers. Please don't leave the Zoom, just go away, take out your videos, but leave the Zoom open because it would be easier to come back. We will see each others again at 1:30 and for the final session of this conference. So thank you very much for being with us until now, and see you in a while.
Welcome everybody again to the second part of the conference. I really hope that you enjoyed the break and are fresh for the new part of the conference. Well, I am Maria Caprile from Notus Applied Research, one of the supporting partners of the Target project. This morning, the main focus of the conference was on JEP implementation in general and facilitating and hindering factors, taking both into account context and institutional aspects. In this new session, we want to focus on a few specific topics which we think are of special relevance, timely, and which have been often neglected in JEP implementation, which are gender in research content, teaching and curriculum, and also sexual harassment. But before starting with this round of presentations, we would like to show one of the videos that Geecco has prepared. It is related with gender in research content, and it deals specifically with robots. So let's see the video.
The influence of robots in our society keeps growing. Until recently, robots were mostly utilized in factories. There was a discussion to what extent they replaced humans and thus led to loss of employment. By now, robots are used in many areas in which they support humans and interact with them. At first glance, this has little to do with sex. On closer inspection, however, surprisingly much. This also brings gender into the focus. Gender refers to specific social expectations and behavior that are attributed to men and women. Our ideas about women and men determine the structure of our society. For example, in the professional world, we often credit men with the ability to fill higher positions or give the benefit of the doubt to women when it comes to caring for children, even though it would be more appropriate to judge people not by their gender, but by their actions. Back to robots. Today, robots are increasingly humanized so people will accept them more easily. When we come into contact with them, we look for certain attributes like voice, hair length, or the form of the lips, and then refer to robots as he or she, even when they don't look like a human being at all. Thus, robots are no longer genderless. Designers, for example, consciously integrate female attributes so people will accept robots more easily. The opposite is the case with war robots, which are meant to look powerful and are extremely masculinized in their design. Because we transfer our ideas of gender onto robots, robots and our relationship with them influence social behavior and social conditions. Not only do our ideas of gender have an impact on the design of robots, the design of robots and our interactions with them in turn affect our idea of what men and women are like.
How can I help you?
Because robotics still is a very recent research field, it may happen that designers unconsciously reinforce gender stereotypes.
How can I help you?
Yet we all are negatively affected by restrictive gender roles, men as well as women. So robots change our everyday lives as soon as they are used in certain fields. The question is, how does this happen? A domestic robot, for instance, may look more female, more male, or completely gender neutral. Robots used in nursing may also shape our image of men and women. We need to ask ourselves how the world we inhabit should be organized. Does a certain research project reinforce stereotypes of men and women? How can robots contribute to reducing gendered stereotypes? Gender-sensitive design addresses the needs of women, men, and all other gender identities, and thus expands a product's target group. As researchers and research funders, you shape our world through research and development. You have the opportunity to break up gender stereotypes. And in this, we need to face up to one question in particular. What world do we want to live in?
Okay, I must say that this is just one of the inspiring videos that the Geecco project has been working on. So I strongly recommend to visit their website because I think they are in a very visual address very complex issues related to engineering, robotics, or science in general, and the gender dimension. So we will start now with the first round of presentations. I will present Bridget Ratzer. She doesn't need much introduction. She has been opening the conference as a Geecco coordinator. And I just wanted to add that she is also professor at the Technical University of Vienna. So thank you, Birgit.
Thank you very much. Actually, I'm the head of a gender competence department, but this does not matter. Thank you very much. Okay, let's see, 7 minutes. Let's start. What I want to do here is to wrap up what we have learned from producing those literature reviews in the first hand and then videos that condense the message of these literature reviews, and to bring to our attention that science and engineering are sort of central fields of our, as Donna Haraway would put it, socio-technical civilization. So how we are mobile, how we live, how we love, how we communicate, how we work, how we spend our free time, maintain our health, all this is influenced or even co-determined by technical artifacts and infrastructures. So gender in research is about ensuring that these artifacts and infrastructures are equally available and useful to all people, and this is the focus that we have here. The initial situation as we see it right now is that an increasing number of funding organizations and research programs ask for the inclusion of the gender dimension in research and innovations. And then you find researchers that actually don't know what exactly to do, and also reviewers in the funding agencies that don't know how to review that demand. So first thing that happens if you approach people who are not necessarily very familiar with gender issues is that there is confusion about this dimension and there's a lot of stereotyping. Actually, this is not something that just I invented. We see lots and lots of artifacts and research projects heading towards this kind of, we say, shrink it and pink it. You immediately forget, of course, about this picture now. And so what do we have? We actually have, and that's what we found when we started our literature reviews, a myriad of gender literature on many STEM topics. So if you, for instance, take human-computer interaction and you look to the databases, you find like 5,000-6,000 hits at once just if you enter gender and human-computer interaction. So there is a lot there. And what we decided to do then in Chico actually is to bundle and systematize the already existing literature in 4 fields, so make it accessible for researchers with other areas of expertise. That's what the literature reviews did. And then we found that the reviews were quite comprehensive and complex, and we did a further translation to those videos that you have seen now, one of them. What did we learn from all this exercise? First of all, first principle to highlight is you have to check if you stumble across some literature, if there is some sort of intersectionality in there. Who is imagined as the user, as the consumer? If women are thought to be a target group, which kind of women are imagined there? Are they young, old, rich, poor? You know, all those categories. Are they heterosexual, gays, gender fluid individuals, and so on? So is the design work across cultures, religions, incomes, races, and geographical locations valid? Very often we find that is very narrow understanding of who could be a sort of user or consumer when it comes to literature. A second very important issue is increasing complexity. And I put it a little bit flippy there. Yes, research is complicated, and yes, research can be very stressful. That's why it is research. But the implication of entering gender dimensions to science and technology is that it really gets more complex and also more expensive and time consuming. So what we very often see that there is somehow this idea of, okay, let's add some sentences about gender, but we would not necessarily change the research design, because this would then need to have much larger user groups if you do usability studies and things like that. So researchers need to consider that, but primarily also the funding agencies need to consider that this is really something that you need to take into account when you set up your programs. So what we have now as a resources available for everybody on our website is 4 different reviews on human-computer interaction and gender, on robots and gender, on energy and gender, and on mobility and gender. They are all quite comprehensive in terms of bundling huge amounts of existing literature and trying also to give an overview on different strands of discourses and so on. As for the videos, so 4 videos are available on the same topics, and there is an upcoming video about intersectionality that will be ready at the end of the project. What I'd also like to draw your attention to is, what does this mean then if you are not entering gender dimensions into your research, and if research and development are going on as they are doing? What we find is lots and lots of examples what this discrimination might mean. This ranges from exclusions, like devices are too big or too small, like those huge cell phones that were constructed a couple of years ago, or examples from, let's say, voice recognition. Like a fun fact, even Mattel designed an interactive Barbie that was not able to interact with children because the voices of the children were too high, so they could only interact with the fathers of the children, in fact. Okay, this is being excluded. Being inferior, that's another thing. Think about things like artifacts like protective clothing with built-in sensors. Most of this clothing is designed for men's bodies only, and even a dangerous handicap if you use it in real life, let's say, for example, in a firefighter unit. Then it there are cases where we see that women are simply ignored as a target group and thereby at risk. You know, all the famous examples from gender medicine, actually, but there are also examples like safety devices in automobiles that protect men much better than women. And then this is the example of the robot, and that's why I wanted to have the robot video here, because I think this is specific again, and it, in a way it's also alarming, because what we have seen, or what we have to understand, is if these kind of devices and artifacts enter to our everyday life, then this is particularly central for our understanding what it means to be a man or a woman, or male or female, or what it means masculinity and femininity. And we also see similar developments in artificial intelligence area and so on. In a way, wrapping this all up and looking at this all together, this is alarming. Moreover, and this might lead to the talk that Amaya Lusa is giving later on, if researchers are not aware of this dimension that is quite important when they develop artifacts, then obviously they would not include it into their teaching. So we are all the way around teaching scientists and engineers that are not familiar again with this kind of content and this kind of gender dimension. So I think it is high time to really speed up with first of all including the gender dimension into research and teaching, and really being very strict, because it's taxpayers' money. At the end of the day, it's also my money going to research that I am, where I'm just discriminated and products are produced that are not useful for me. So here are our materials. I forgot to say, there is also maybe for institutions who might be interested, an exhibition about gender in research, a very nice one. It's available in 9 different languages. You also can grab it from our website, and all the material like the reviews and the videos you find also there. Okay, thank you.
Much, Brigitte. The next presentation is from Anastasia Sabatinov. She's a professor at the University of Thessaloniki and also member of the board, vice president of the network of engineering and management school in the Mediterranean. So Anastasia, please.
So, hello everybody. I will shift just a little the discussion, because here we speak about a network, not a university, not a funding institution, a network of engineering schools, and this is different. This network, as you know from all the time now we're discussing, it's a network that is based in Marseille in France, but has many members from all the countries of the Mediterranean region, from European side, from the North African side, and from the Middle East side. So it's a regional focus. I mean, what we are doing there, it's focused regionally. And then the context here, if we have to define the context, is engineering context, because it's a network of engineering schools. Okay, now we start to have some management school, but what we have done until now, it was for engineering. So the context is engineering education, but through a network, not in the university, which means that the teaching, it's not the role of the network. It's learning, collaborative learning, and acting. So we can see that this is a complex system. So we approach this with an approach of complex system. Being engineers, we are doing this. So it's a network with a Mediterranean focus, with an engineering context, and we want to apply there learning and acting on a social change, which is gender equality. Complex system approach then. What we achieved? We achieved to have a vivid and very active and a very effective working group on gender equality, a policy statement, That policy statement was adopted by 10 member institutions, other engineering schools in different countries, and adopted, of course, by the General Assembly of the network. And this statement already had an impact on the board and the governance of the network, because now we have a gender balanced board and governance of the network and of the working group. These are the main achievements, but we have other achievements as well that are not directly connected with teaching, because as I say, network cannot teach. We don't teach, we are not authorized, but for practicing the gender equality and learning. So, and we learn how to assess our activities. You have to take in mind that we are engineers and we don't know from social change or change theories. So we're very practical. So, but we learned how to assess and what to assess. What we created, and it's very strong, it's a community of practice. And this community of practice is very diverse, as you understand, because we cover many national contexts, all these countries with difference in religion, in politics, in society, in economics, in culture. So it's very, very diverse, this community of practice, but it's working and it's very effective. What we created, and this will remain, it's the living lab. We have created within the network a living lab for sustainability of gender equality changes. What means there, what we are doing there, we are collaborating, co-working in developing projects, in developing workshops, in developing papers, in solidifying the knowledge, in practicing everything. So it's a living lab, as the word says. And this is for sustainability of this endeavor that we started with this change. The other thing that will remain and we gain and will remain there, it's that we start to turn from multidisciplinarity, because we were a network of many different scientific fields, but scientific fields or engineering fields. And that was multidisciplinary network. But now, working with the social change, we shift towards interdisciplinarity learning, engineering and social and humanities. And of course, we move to transdisciplinarity acting because we collaborate with many other stakeholders, national stakeholders in different countries and different other partners. So this is something that we learned, we achieved, and it will will stay. Then we worked and we created resilience of the of our activities. What I mean that we had this disruption with COVID, which means that for a network, okay, university can continue to operate, but a network, how, if this can be done only by meetings and by connecting and so. But we managed to have resilience on this and not to be disrupted by focusing on the tree of knowledge and problem solving against any disruption, which means that we build knowledge on gender equality, we consolidate this collaborative learning on gender equality, we disseminate and we co-create. What are the factors now that facilitated us in this, and what factor there are the barriers? The engineering context. We have discussed today that it's a difficult context, because it's engineering, technologies, problem solving, but does not have all this environment, the knowledge of a social change. So this was a barrier. The other barrier is that until now, we speak about gender equality in universities, but this is a standalone value. Gender equality because it's fair, because it's social, but it's not only this. And then, as I said, we were lacking the knowledge of change theory. And we had the difficulty of national context, so many national contexts. What facilitated us to this? First of all, we took a systematic approach, and this is our suggestion, of gender equality, which is horizontally connected to our sustainable development goals. So we connected to any activity, to any learning, and to any acting the gender equality to sustain sustainable development goal where engineers act. This is our profession. I mean, technology development, innovation for sustainable development goal implementation. And then we learned and we shift to interdisciplinary co-learning. And then we created commitment to gender equality. Why? Because we connected this with sustainable development. It's not a standalone value, gender equality. It's sustainable development, it's sustainability. It has to be connected with other narratives and with other values in order to be as a value, a new value in these contexts, which are different. And then to overpass the national context complexity, because we have a big complexity here, we create emotions and cognitive characteristics. As I told you, trust for relations, trust, joy, feeling in the same family, we share the same values. These are very strong characteristics. So what was the biggest key facilitator? The strong vision. The strong vision that we have, which is sustainable development, and that gender equality, it's not a woman issue, but it's a human issue that it affects all of us. Then the other was facilitating factor was the sustainable development framework, that we go toward a green economy, a low carbon growth, resource efficiency, social inclusivity, circular economy, blue economy, bioeconomy. They are both scientists and engineers play the same role. So the narrative now, it's not only gender equality and fairness, but gender equality to boost green economy. And then synergies of gender equality with sustainable development goals. As I told you, so gender equality is the prerequisite for all these sustainable development goals. And here on the right, I have all these papers that we have written to consolidate this knowledge. But the most important is that we create new narratives, new approaches, new toolbox, new mindset. Well, the narrative have to do what I'm saying, that gender equality is not only a social issue. When you go to for gender equality in engineering context, then you have to connect this with the sustainable development. New narratives, new approaches. The new approach, they were borrowed from our experience in engineering and complex system solving, which means that we have different approaches like the stigmas, like the spillover approach that are really approaching science. This came out from science. So we apply this approach to this social change, because as I said, we apply what we know about innovation from engineering. And then we create a new toolbox, new skills, new tools, and new mindset. And all this to be adaptable, as I told you before, and resilient. Finally, what is the key facilitator factor is leadership. Leadership and the framework for leaders development, because finally what we are doing there in the network, we create leaders because for gender equality, because they will be the scholars or the students who will be the future engineers that they will take the leap towards changing their institutions. So what we need mostly to do, leadership and leaders development. And we created fearless leadership, which is very important. And we created a new framework of leadership development, which is soft leadership, which is against the hard leadership that we know in our university. And this, we have all this, I told you before, soft tools, emotions, problem solving. We need a vision, we need common values, we need interdisciplinarity, creativity, problem solving thinking, system thinking, collaborative learning, dialogues, inspiration, intuition, self-awareness, Andy-based learning, family feeling, no competition, space for heterodox views, because we have many, since we come from the very complex context of Mediterranean, non-judgmental comparison between the institution, because one institution can be behind in gender equality, the other can be in front, but we don't judge, we just inspire to do the same. And finally, transformation. This is what I call soft leadership, that was the key facilitating factor. And of course, female, if we want to make a change, gender equal change in engineering, we need a female leadership. And soft, to my opinion, and female leadership. And we have to know that leadership, it's not a journey. It's not a destination, it's a journey. And we learn. We're not ready to do that from the beginning, but we learn there with others. So that were all the new things that I told you, the new framework that we applied there, and they will remain, and they change the environment of the network. And now we create leaders and change agents that they will bring this new tool set, mindset to their universities. It's like an umbrella. It's a spillover effect that I told you. So if I need to give you, if you ask me to give you a key message, I will give this. The JEPs are context sensitive. They depend on the context. That's why I had a question in the morning when we said about the definition of JEPs. And then the second is to make the choice of leadership that best fit in. Leadership is very important. We propose the soft female leadership. And then to interconnect the gender equality with all sustainable development goals, change this narrative. It's not a single value, gender equality. We have to stop to work on this. We have to connect with everything now, which is research, innovation, but concern our sustainability, our life, our well-being, our resilience. So these three key messages. And I think I stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Anastasia. I am glad now to give the floor to Ivanka Popovic, who is the rector of the University of Belgrade and also partner of the Target project.
So thank you very much for this opportunity to speak to you all and to share our experiences. I will take it down to a different level. I thank Anastasia for the strategic overview, but now let's see how this works in an individual institution. And this is where the problem starts. Strategy is wonderful, but when we're in the field, things become a little bit different. So I have no slides because I think I would just like to convey some rather important messages of our experience. And I'm sure that most of you will recognize them as your own issues. Just to briefly explain the structure of the University of Belgrade. It's a very large, research-intensive, comprehensive university that caters to the needs of about 100,000 students. It's located in the city of Belgrade, and the faculties are dispersed all over town, which also talks about feelings of unity and belonging to the university. In this respect, the structure of our students is that almost 60% of the enrolled students at the university are female. And our staff follows along these lines, that at our assistant and associate professors, we have parity, it's about 50-50. And we have 40% female full professors. So we are at the university not really reaching out for accessibility to these teaching positions, but we are talking more about enabling and empowering women to move forward more in positions of governance. And there we have a mixed situation also. We have 31 faculties where we have only 5 lady deans. On the other hand, we have 11 research institutes where 9 of the directors are female. So once again, sometimes this causes confusion in where some people are complacent in saying we've reached our goals. And on the other hand, we know that we are not providing equal opportunities for all. And therefore, various role models need to be set to improve the situation. And our ethical codex of our university very clearly speaks about the ban of any type of discrimination. But one of the problems is that nobody really takes these documents very seriously. It's all written very nicely, but on the other hand, the implementation is sometimes slow and lax. So when we talk about the general need for improving the situation, we made some steps, and the University of Belgrade, at least the rector's office, passed its first gender equality plan in 2018, and then at the level of the whole university, it was passed in 2019 with the formation of a gender equality committee. Now, the Gender Equality Committee was faced actually with these situations of how to make this truly a university where there's equal opportunity and where we are trying to attack the various subconscious and conscious prejudices that exist. And one of our biggest issues is that many people consider that gender is a non-issue, that this has been resolved, that we should move on. Historically, the previous generations dealt with this and everything is fine and dandy, but of course we know that it isn't. And so in terms of general regulations through the gender equality plan, we have fulfilled some of the needs that are required that the university apply for horizon projects and other activities. So therefore on paper, as I said, everything is perfect, but there are always some specific triggers that cause you to maybe think in a different way. So as I said, there's a certain complacency about digging into gender equality issues because there is so much resistance to the fact that they are not there. But then some things happen at the level of society that get you on board for maybe a topic that can help things along. And was this a few months ago, there were some issues, not at our university, but at an educational institution about very serious abuse of students and sexual harassment. So, of course, this became a trigger for action, and where the university decided that maybe one thing where all of the people running the university and the faculties would come together is that there would be a sexual harassment document that would deal with these issues and that would be more far-reaching than our general ethical codex. So the first faculty at our university that introduced sexual harassment regulations was our Faculty of Political Sciences many years ago, and my thanks to Professor Duhacek, who is with us today at this meeting, that she and the dean of that time initiated that document, which was the first stepping stone in the direction of making a university level document. Now in the later years, 3 other faculties, of course, most of them in the social sciences or exclusively philosophy, philology, and law, have already started working on their individual documents regarding treatment of sexual harassment, which has brought us to the situation that now we have a document being prepared at the university level. And the question is now, how should this document function? More or less, where is the boundary between what can be university regulations and what needs to be dealt with by the judiciary, by the police, the courts, and so forth? So the question of the limitations or the boundaries of this document that should be set up regarding first what is, first of all, recognized as sexual harassment, because in our preliminary research of the topic, we realized that many students and many teachers are not fully aware of what sexual harassment truly is. And therefore, beside defining it, what would be some kind of a warning, what would be a misdemeanor, and what then needs to go to the court system. So in this respect, I think that during this calendar year, the university will come up with a document which by its own existence will cause many people to pause and to think and to change their behavior. And this will in itself be a powerful tool for change. Of course, some of the elements of these regulations will also unfortunately be implemented because we know of cases that are causing serious problems at some faculties. And finally, because I know I've passed my 7 minutes, what would be the key take-home message? Well, I don't think I will be very original, but I will just pass on some of the things that I have learned from my colleagues in this field. I will mention Barbara De Micheli, some others. When I started doing these type of regulations at my own faculty when I was dean there, we had a sort of understanding that these things would be implemented. And they counseled me that I should put it in writing. And putting it in writing is the first step to implementation. Even though maybe in the beginning, it's just some writing on paper, eventually, I think it will be adopted by the academic community and taken seriously. So I think one cannot take anything for granted as a university regulation, because it can just be a ripple in a pond that will go away once the governing body is changed, the new people come. You need to have regulations that are fully in place and that give not only a short-term but a long-term vision of the policy of your university or institution on how you will handle gender equality issues and how you will treat sexual harassment. And I think that is a good way to move forward. And I hope that by the end of the year, I could inform you that we have a fully functional sexual harassment regulation guide in place. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Ivanka. Glad to give the floor to Amaya Lusa, who is professor at the University Polytechnic of Catalonia and partner of the Geecco project.
Thank you very much. Do you see the
yes,
my presentation? Okay, good afternoon. Thanks for the presentation. I'm a full professor at the UPC, which is one of the Geecco partners. UPC, Universitat Politècnica de Catalunya, is a public university in the STEM field. It's a big university with about 30,000 students. The percentage of women, both among students and academic staff, is less than the 30%. And what I'm going to summarize today is our experience regarding the inclusion of the gender dimension in teaching. Why do we need, or why do we want to include gender dimension in teaching? I guess I don't have to insist much at this point of the conference on the reasons why it's important to include gender dimension in teaching. So I will just like to stress a couple of additional reasons. The first one is that including gender dimension in teaching improves the teaching quality and also the social relevance of the knowledge, the technologies, and the innovations that will be produced by the professionals, the same as in research. And the second one is that in some cases, as it is the situation in Catalonia, in our university, is that the law obliges universities including gender dimension in teaching. The second question, which is especially relevant in the STEM field, where most subjects might not seem to be influenced by the sex or gender variables, is can we include the gender dimension in all courses, regardless of the scientific field they belong to? And the answer is absolutely yes, because that's true, because when we talk about including gender dimension in teaching, we are thinking not only on the contents, but also on the methodology, on the evaluation, and on the learning environment management. Here we have just some examples of actions that we can do for including the gender dimension in these 4 pillars. For the contents, of course, we should consider sex and gender as analyzing and designing variables. We can also include more references of works done by women that have been invisible through the history. We can stress the social use of the knowledge, try to break gender stereotypes by means of the examples or case studies we use. Regarding the methodology, it is advised to use different methodologies, masterclass, team working, etc. So we are adapting to the diversity in our students group. Here is also important to be aware of using inclusive language and to use images that break the gender stereotypes, or at least that do not maintain them. As for the evaluation, try to use different systems. For example, do not use only test exams for evaluating the whole course, because on average, women perform worse than men in test exams. And it is mainly due to less self-esteem, because basically they mark less answers. And finally, in the management of the learning environment, we have to take care of creating a climate that is perceived comfortable, safe, so women participate more and the same as men. We should not allow mansplaining or men interrupting women, for example. Try to empower women and be aware of the role of each student when they do team working, mainly to prevent girls being assigned always the secretary duties. As I said, these are just some examples. We have many other actions. We have different tools and guidelines that can help us introducing the gender dimension in our courses. But we don't want the gender dimension to be included only in our subjects. We want all university courses, including gender dimension in teaching. So the next question is, what do we need to include gender dimension in teaching in our institution? According to my experience in the Geecco project at UPC, we need to work on 4 key elements. The institutional commitment. You can also do many things by yourself without having it, but in my experience, having the institutional commitment makes definitely the difference. At UPC, besides of giving support to the activities that we have done with the Geecco project during the last years and even leading some more recent activities, this commitment can be clearly seen mainly by 2 things. First, the definition of a gender competence in teaching, which all bachelor's and master courses will have to include. And also a coordinator for the inclusion of the gender dimension in teaching at UPC has been appointed to help with this, which in this case, the coordinator, it's me. The second one is the inclusion of a gender track in the funding of teaching innovation projects. Another piece is raising awareness so people understand the importance of the issue and then is willing to include the gender dimension in their courses. What we have done here is basically organize talks and events, raising awareness campaigns, including Twitter, and also disseminating some good practices from UPC people. The third essential piece is building capacity. So people is not only willing, but is also able to include gender dimension in their subjects. And linked to this, we have the fourth piece, which is giving tools and guidelines that can also help both people that is teaching and also people that is in charge of designing the curricula. The first thing we did to build capacity and give tools and guidelines was to set up a pilot project in which about 40 people participated and that had 3 main objectives. The first one was to learn, because none of us had experience introducing gender in teaching. The second one was to create some tools as an output of this pilot project, and we end up with a guideline adapted to UPC and a questionnaire for students. And the third one was to build a kind of community of practice for exchanging experiences, and also because it's a group of people that can spread the voice in their schools, faculties, and departments. More recently, we have done more trainings. We have created resources for schools and faculties, which are the ones that have to design the curricula and demonstrate that we are complying with the law. We have just presented 3 days ago a website in which you can find women that have contributed to the different fields of UPC and that can be used as reference in teaching. And we have language guides and some external guides. And all these resources are put to the disposal of the community by means of the Gender Equality Institutional website. And let me finish with some conclusions, which are mainly the factors that, from my perspective, hinder and facilitate the inclusion of the gender dimension in teaching. The main hindering factors are the lack of experience and knowledge. There are some tools, but they were not adapted to the STEM field, so we needed adapted tools. Another hindering factor that fortunately we have not experienced at UPC is the lack of resources for adapting or creating tools, for doing trainings, for raising awareness, etc. And of course, the resistances, which can be active or passive and can come both from the top level or from the down level, from the people that is teaching. The facilitating factors are having resources, of course, having regulations, because this pressure also made us advance in a more rapid way. And as I said before, the institutional commitment, which is essential and also allows combining the bottom-up and the top-down approach, which I think is good. And what I would recommend to those institutions starting or willing to include the gender dimension, work hard for getting the institutional commitment. I know sometimes it's difficult, but keep fighting for it, because yeah, you get it at the end, and as I said, it makes a difference. There are also many tools and guidelines, so take them and adapt them to your own context. Make it gradually. You don't need to do everything from today to tomorrow. You can start from actions that are easy. And finally, I strongly recommend to replicate a pilot project similar to the one that we implemented at UPC, because I think it was the seed or the catalyst for all the activities that came after. Of course, if you need some advice or help, we are open to it. And I finish with this. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Amaya. We will start now the second part of the debate, and I will give the floor to my colleague at Notus, Rachel Palmen.
Thanks very much, Maria. Thank you very much to all those really interesting presentations. Yeah, I'm Rachel Palmen. I work with Maria Caprile and Angelina Cussi here at Notus, and we support the implementing institutions. 3 of the implementing institutions to carry out their GEPs. And I'm very pleased to open the floor to our invited experts for this afternoon's session. So we have Christina Marolda, and she's an international independent expert and a former policy officer in charge of research and innovation in the EC Directorate General for Mobility and Transport. And she's also a member of the Women in Science Working Group set up in the Research Directorate General of the European Commission. We're also lucky to have with us today Elizabeth Gunther, who's a social scientist and gender and diversity and digital transformation in and through education at the Center for Teacher Education at the University of Vienna. We're also pleased to have with us Catherine Zippel, who's a professor of sociology at the Northeastern University. And she's also co-chair of the Social Exclusion and Inclusion Seminar at the Minder de Gunsberg Center for European Studies at Harvard University. And I also welcome to the floor Sandra Larsson, who's the Director of Ethnography and Evaluation Research at the University of Colorado. And she's also part of the Target Advisory Board. So if you'd like to just speak about your reflections on some of the presentations that we've heard, if we could go through the reflections, what you're thinking about the presentations that we've heard, and then we'll open the debate between the participants. So Christina, I don't know if you've got any comments that you'd like to mention.
Well, I took notes in both sessions of this seminar. That is about 10 pages. So okay. It will be a bit difficult to condensate my thoughts and try to find a red line among all the different thoughts I had. I will try to give some key impressions that I have. So first of all, I think that we all agree that this gender dimension goes much beyond the representation, because that is not a question of head counting, as I always said. That is more a question of content of what we do, what we teach, what we learn, and what we practice in our professions. In my experience, for example, also when I was in the commission, I retired a couple of years ago already, so it's a past experience, but I always fought against this issue of having equal participation in projects, for example. I was always looking about mainstreaming. I was working in a field that was extremely male-dominated, that was transport. And at the beginning was transport and not mobility. When it moves to mobility, it changes a little bit. But I think that it's really important to understand what are the real issues there. And the question is also to have awareness of what the issues are. I remember a couple of years ago, and well, no, that was already in 2014, I published a very stupid and short booklet that was called She Moves. And everybody was so astonished to see how many issues were related to gender and transport. And they were never thinking about that because they thought that engineering is gender neutral, which is not true at all. So, and Anastasia can confirm that, I think. And I think that is the issue. And the other problem is that it has to be really understood that gender is not at all a women's problem. That is really a societal problem. And that goes much beyond the gender things. It concerns inclusion, sustainability, so the links to the SDGs is very important. It includes intersectionality, because what I always say is that the world is not binary with men on one side and women on the other. I mean, there are different groups of population, different groups of people, and in these groups, there are still differences between men and women, but they can vary a lot. I mean, making an example in transport, I do not think that a rich, educated, urban woman has the same mobility problems as a low-educated, low-income, rural living woman. So these are quite different issues. And so the act that is not a gender issue should stress. I mean, I was counting the participants this morning in the session of this morning, and I saw that out of about 100 participants, a dozen were men. And I thank them to be here and to comment on the presentations. It is really annoying to see that whenever you talk about gender issues, you only have women in the room. So, for example, my experience when organizing workshops, when I was in the commission, I always avoided to put the word gender or women in the title. And then I found the room with also a lot of men attending. And then suddenly they realized that we were talking about women issues or gender issues, for example, in logistics, where we had, for example, 5 women presenters in a logistics workshop. And then you see that their social interests in what logistics means is much higher than the technical one that only men have. And they put on the table some quite different points of view. So that is to raise the awareness about these issues. And I think it is important to raise awareness and to let's see that it's not only a question. Of course, it is extremely important to include these issues in the academic careers and the academic teaching. But then why girls, for example, are refraining to approach some specific technical field? Because they see that after their graduation, they do not have so many jobs, career possibilities. So it is important to streamline also the presence of women also as role models in some traditionally male positions and careers. And we need that. For example, I would say that is my last example I would like to stress. I think that in many countries now, we are assisting at the creation of a new ministry, that is the Ministry for Environmental or Sustainable Transformation. I think that is paramount to have women's view in this context. This transformation that is going towards a new paradigm of the environment, of the sustainability, cannot be left only to a man's view. And I don't want to say that it's better or worse. It is complementary. And we have to work together. And I think that this is a message that is very difficult to pass, because whenever you try to pass this kind of messages, you always face some comments like, oh, you are then in favor of pink quotas. Yes, I am in favor of pink quotas, but that is not the core of our discussions.
Thank you very much, Christina. Some very interesting insights. And then if we go on to Elizabeth.
Yes, well, thank you very much for inviting me. I think what we have seen this whole day is actually very well the interconnectedness of, on the one hand, gender equality policy, which are targeted on careers, but also on the knowledge, and that you cannot really separate those different layers. So if it would be like the one sentence to summarize what happened today, I think you can really see very well on how everything is interconnected very much. And because I was asked at head of the conference to talk a little bit about on how you can implement the gender dimension in research and also in teaching, which was also has been discussed so far. I was actually thinking there is already a gender dimension in everything, because most of research actually is very much masculine dominated, even so it's not talked about. But actually most of the research and most teaching, at least when there are people involved in some form, has a very much masculine norm. So there is already gender there, but it's not talked about and it's not addressed about. So perhaps, thinking about this from a different point of view could actually also open up the conversation about how to tackle this invisible norm that is existing there. And it might be easy then to engage in some kind of conversation, because it can trigger some kind of reaction, which might be resistance, as we have heard on different forms here. But it could also start some thinking about, okay, what does it actually mean? Like Christina just now said, when it comes to transport and logistics, you have the same when it comes to how do you measure stuff? How do you code specific realities? Or like we have seen in the video, how do you construct a robot? There's always a kind, or not always, but very often a kind of gender dimension already in there, even so it's not talked about explicitly. So the question would be, how can we then change this to be more inclusive and more sensitive for different realities? And there have been several points made here, so I might just repeat some of the stuff that has already been said at very different points. Like, for one is just to realize that gender plays a role, and it is there most of the time anyway, if we talk about it or not. But actually that it's also important to go beyond the stereotypes and to just deconstruct a little bit about how do we view the things that are there. Or like the last presentation also has said, it's also an issue on how do you create an environment where you can start this kind of conversation in the classroom, or where you can like open up the space for different voices to be heard. So I think these are very important points that have been also talked about this day. And I think that's the way forward on how to continue this journey we're on.
Thanks very much, Elizabeth. And if we pass over to Catherine.
Thank you so much. I did want to pick up on the very important and dear to my heart topic of sexual harassment that Ivanka Popovic brought up. And I think it's such an important topic that we have been neglecting still. And, I wrote my first paper 25 years ago on sexual harassment. And that was just after Anita Hill, Clarence Thomas hearings brought sexual harassment in the United States into living rooms. And this was already the second or third round of university policies where they try to define what sexual harassment is. And sexual harassment then was seen as sex discrimination with a really important legal framework from Catherine McKinnon. Today, we still know, that her theory that sexual harassment is abuse of gender power is very, very true. And there's a very recent report from the National Academies in the United States that has put together really the up-to-date knowledge of the research community now over the last 25 years, and makes really important recommendations that could be really helpful also in European context. Of course, every country, every university is its own, but I was thinking about that when I heard from Ivanka Popovic about, you know, how important those policies are. They are, you know, because they create language to combat the taboo and for people to be able to name what they're experiencing. One really important thing is that gender harassment feeds sexual harassment, and these are everyday interactions that are happening every day. So for the universities, they have to realize that it's very risky to report harassment. We know that retaliation is the worst. So it's sort of like you experience harassment as the target, and then you try to seek help, and then you get retaliated against for just speaking up. So that's why I think the bystander approaches are incredibly important today, to really think about how to empower and how to get everyone to step in. And that's also the place for men. You know, we need to have really good men who are trained, who know that how to interact and how to act in a different way. And I think that's where institutions can really work with and help to stop harassment as employers. The research community now is really thinking about it, not just as ethical guidelines, as the universities have already, but also as a violation of the integrity of research. So it's not just plagiarism, you know, but it is part of the way that we need to think about that research can't be done and teaching can't be done unless we stop this problem. And so in the US, the funding agencies have been jumping in. And are actually no longer funding principal investigators with grants if they know that the universities have been finding them in violation of the laws. So there has to be some interaction between the institutions as well, because so far they are complicit in the way that it's been working. And my most recent chapter, I'm happy to put that in the chat, is actually about professional associations. Because they are the ones who set the norms and the rules for how we interact as professional scientists, as professional academics. And to think about that, we need to have a norm change of that harassment is not tolerable at the lowest level. And today, when we think about COVID and what it's taught us is that harassment, you know, I was happy, wow, no more physical harassment. Nobody can touch each other anymore. Finally, women and, you know, people who have vulnerable groups are no longer touchable. Well, but what we've learned is that harassment very quickly moves online as well. And we see very vicious attacks from the right-wing groups who are using also sexual harassment. There's a new book out on the violence that women as politicians encounter, sexual violence and death threats and all of that. And we see that parallel also now for scientists. When women raise their voice in the public, they get shut down. You know, so we tell junior people today they have to have an internet profile and they know they're going to be harassed. So how do we, and I think that's one of the new challenges, how do we prepare people to really go online and deal with the online you know, climate, because harassment is of course happening in this climate. And I was very happy to hear that the University of Belgrade has the policy movements also at the very level of the departments. Every department chair is in charge and to set norms and to make clear that this is not tolerable behavior, and then to find a way of stepping in if it has to be. But those individual cases are very hard to deal with for universities, and that's why the whole idea of preventing harassment from happening and having effective measures, as was mentioned, you know, for awareness raising is crucial. But I really believe that the way to go is to treat everyone as if they're on board. So to think about bystander approaches to really get also, and especially the men involved in this project.
Thanks very much, Catherine, for your insights. And we'll just hand over to Sandra to have a brief reflection on the presentations we saw, and then we will go through some of the questions. We'll invite the previous panelists up as well, and then we can all brainstorm together. So Sandra, over to you.
Thank you. It's nice to be here. I want to reinforce Catherine's comments too, that I was struck by what I see in the US efforts of sort of the equivalent of gender equality plans, the failure to deal effectively with sexual harassment in our institutions. And one is that the policies are often in place, but they are not enforced, and there's not a procedure or a mechanism by which they can be. And so I think to give courage to Ivanka, it's really great to see this work coming from the top at the University of Belgrade, and to think hard about what those mechanisms are that will make this have a reality. And like Catherine, I'm encouraged by the funding agencies in the United States stepping in to have some enforcement mechanisms of their own, because I think that will put incentive to the universities to deal with this more effectively. The other comments I wanted to make on the presentations as a group were two things that I was thinking about. One is, how can we use the cultures of science and engineering to help this effort? We talked often this morning about, or this morning for me, it's afternoon where you are. It's very early morning where I am. We talked about the ways in which science and engineering cultures could be barriers and generate resistance. But I also wonder, are there characteristics of those cultures that would help us overcome these challenges and build the allyship and the buy-in that we need? You know, are there ways, particularly to use meritocratic arguments in science and engineering to build up the argument that you know, the presence of people of all genders in the research discussions, in the content of the research, and the developing of the questions and the design are part of getting to excellence and the best ideas and solutions for the challenges that face our global society. So that was one thing I thought about, is how can we use those cultures for as helps rather than hindrances. The other thing I thought about is that in the US, I've been working a lot on the experience of advanced institutions, and there the content of the research, the gender dimension in science and engineering, has been very little emphasized, both by the funder of those programs and by the activities that they've chosen. And it also occurs to me would incorporating the gender dimension in the conduct of science and engineering research and or teaching be a way to help scientists and engineers recognize that if gender can be an influence in their disciplinary field, perhaps it also could be an influence on their institutional processes of evaluation of performance, you know, bias, discrimination, and so on. You know, people are not very good at transferring knowledge from one domain to another. This is something we know in studies of learning. And so if one were to recognize it in one's field of engineering or science, would it help you to see it also in other realms of the institution? I don't know the answer to that, but that's a question that was raised for me by the very excellent presentations.
Thanks very much, Sandra. I'm just wondering if any of the presenters from earlier on had any questions for for our invited experts here. Or Ivanka, would you like to comment on some of the comments from Catherine?
Well, first of all, I would like to express my gratitude for the support that our institution has for continuing in this direction. And I don't have a specific question at the moment, but I'm just hoping that you are available for personal interactions if we have some questions, if we get stuck on some points, that we can turn to you for guidance and counseling. That would be all, but thank you very much.
Certainly, I'd be delighted to. And I know that Anke Lipinski is also in the room, who is actually involved in a very large and major project funded from the European Union on sexual harassment. So there are European projects as well that, you know, that are really important to connect. So if Anke can leave her information in the chat, you know, then I think that would be really awesome also to connect, you know, at the European level. But the US has had, you know, policies experience now for, you know, for 30 years. And we do, it just makes sense to really think about like how to, do the efforts that are happening at the European level to really put together the collective wisdom, and to think about like how can we scale up these local and national efforts to really have an international movement, because we also see that those harassers are moving internationally. They call it in the US passing the trash, when a person moves from one institution to another, and the privacy concerns and confidentiality keep people from being exposed. And we see that at the international level, that faculty, professors who get a lot of money move around in the world. So I do see that we need to actually, even that way, make sure that those international protections don't exist. So yes, very delighted to be of help in any kind of way.
Rachel, if there's still time, I'd like to shortly react to Sandra, because just from my experience, actually, it's a brilliant idea to approach STEM researchers with the topic of gender in their research, because that's what they are basically interested in. And usually gender perspective sort of enriches the research and makes it more interesting, and so this but this is really just an individual experience here in Vienna. This really opens floor to other topics like representation of women or working culture or things like that.
Thanks very much, Brigitte. Yes, I think it's interesting how we're talking about two very different topics here. So we're talking about integrating the gender dimension into research and teaching, but we're also talking about developing policies and protocols for sexual harassment. And I think something that's seemed to have come through all of the talks and the comments is, this disjuncture between having it on paper and then implementation in terms of the sexual harassment policy, what Ivanka was explaining at the University of Belgrade, and then in terms of the gender dimension in teaching, having the know-how and the competence to really then take forward integrating the gender dimension into the different various subject areas. So I think that's quite an interesting commonality between the two areas, this sort of big black box in terms of implementation and competence development for integrating the gender dimension. Has anyone got any questions that they'd like to pose to any of our panelists? If you'd like to put some questions in the chat, that would be really great. Has anyone got any more comments that they'd like to say to sort of bring together this session?
Christina has her hand up.
Christina.
Oh, yes, thank you. Yeah, I have a question for you all. I presume the projects are both in the program of social sciences. And that is something that is a little bit annoying me, because again, it goes in the direction of having the JET as a standalone issue. I would like to see a real gender dimension in technological codes. I would like to know which are the real issues in energy. What are the questions to be tackled in projects in energy, in transport, in mechanics, in materials research, in whatever that is strictly engineering. I mean, these are two wonderful projects. I really like them a lot, but they will have no influence on the way research is done in the real technical subjects. How can we overcome this major barrier that we have?
Maybe Amaya would like to comment on this, from integrating the gender dimension in the Polytechnic University in the field of engineering.
Can you hear me? Yeah. Well, first, what I would like to say is that is it true that in everything you organize along gender, you don't have men? But gender in teaching is a is a piece of exception a bit. I mean, it's not that we have a lot of men, but there's hope because, for example, in the pilot project, we had several men interested in, and also in July we organized a series of trainings which were online due to the situation, and we had also many men interested. And regarding research, the contents, I think that those that are not interested will have to be interested, because if they want to get funds, at least if they want to get funding from the national or the European agencies, they will need to introduce gender in research, and they will have to do it properly. I mean, not just a matter of ticking boxes, but doing it well. And I think also that all the work that has explained Brigitte, and with this the different in energy robotics, also with the videos, all this can also help.
Yeah, and Athanasia from the European Commission says as well to check out the Gendered Innovations report on in the website, because they have various different cases throughout different disciplines. And I mean, I think this is part of the key as well. I think interacting, creating these collaborations and these relationships between social scientists and gender experts with disciplinary experts to sort of begin to brainstorm how to integrate the gender dimension throughout the whole process, from the research questions to developing methodology to research analysis to the impact of the research. I think this is something where gender experts can work together with people who are specialists in different disciplinary fields to really take that forward. Thank you, Maya, for your comments.
Elizabeth has her hand up too.
Okay, Elizabeth.
I was just thinking something similar like you were saying, actually, because I think not everyone will have expertise in everything, and I think that's a little bit too much to ask, but bringing different people together can then create something new. And I think one way to foster this is also to make men aware and other people aware that actually it's not just about, doing gender work for women, it's also about doing work for everyone, which might benefit them as well, in the sense of if there's a better working culture over there, it is a benefit for everyone. There's some evidence actually, if you want to retain good researchers and if you want to recruit good researchers, it's very well if you also have like a good reputation, or if there's a good working culture there. So there might be a benefit for the organization, to invest in policies when it comes to sexual harassment or harassment anyway, or gender equality policies, because then they can also like increase their standing for other organizations or for other experts. So I think that's why I think this is all very much interconnected. And if you want to engage men, I think one of the way to do this to start them to make concern about it, like it has been discussed here, how to raise their concern that if they want to get funding, they need to address this. If they want to have like good colleagues to collaborate with, then they need to address their working conditions and so on. If they want to have good students and good graduates to work with, then they have to have like a really good education and teach them adequately. So you just need people, and you just need to make them aware that they are missing out on something very important if they continue the way they are working right now. But they also have to learn by themselves. It's not only up to us women to teach men how to do the world.
If I may add one aspect, men wake up when their daughters talk to them about the harassment and the discriminations that they encounter. And then I had a chair who looked at me and he said, well, my daughter tells me what she's experiencing as a PhD student in the STEM department. And then he said, and I wonder, who my people in my department can tell that to. And it was his staff person who heard all the stories. So the knowledge, the stories are there. The question is just who gets told those stories, and for men to show themselves as allies, and to learn how to be allies and to be actually there as trusting people. That's going to bring a major normative change, in institutions. But yes, I mean, they still hold the power. So for that reason, the white men in institutions still hold the power, especially at the professoriate level and at the university higher levels of administration. So without them, how do you do organizational change? So we do need to find ways.
Thanks very much, Catherine. And that also, these comments about how to involve men in the gender equality, implementing gender equality plans and for institutional change, takes us back to the comments that Bridget made right at the beginning of the conference, how it disproportionately falls on the shoulders often of women to push forward this gender equality agenda. So it's something that we do need to change, really. And it's 3 o'clock. And so I'll now hand over. Well, thank you very much to all the participants for this session. That was really, really useful. You made some really interesting and useful comments, and hopefully it's the beginning of a discussion that we can carry on. And so I'll hand over now back over to Angela and to Bridget for the closing remarks for the conference. So thank you very much.
So you are now experiencing just a work in progress set of slides. This is version 3 or 4, I think, that we prepared in the background. Actually, yes, here we are. This is the closing session. And so Angela and me, we will try to quickly sort of wrap up the discussions that we had today and pick out some points. And who is starting? This is me starting. Okay, so where would we point to? CHAPs are important, yes, but they are a challenging instrument, and it's not like you have a CHAP and then structural change just happens. There were lots of viewpoints arguing that it's an ongoing process and that even existing CHAPs need to be evaluated and so on. What is important to keep in mind is from this timely topics session that we had in the afternoon to reflect on the gender dimension in innovation, research and teaching content, that the gender dimension is much beyond representation. So very often if you come up with, okay, we need to do something about gender equality, it's about head count and percentage of women. But it is about how we are there and in what way we are there, we learn there, we teach there, we invent there, we work here. So that's much more. And gender is always there, as Elizabeth stressed it. It's very often only the invisible norm. So if we name it, if we go beyond the stereotypes, and if we manage to create environments that are inclusive to all genders, it's a win-win situation, as it was also mentioned now, for all genders again. And the very important topic of sexual harassment, this goes a little bit back to what has been said above. How do we teach, learn, and work with each other? Who is there? Who needs to be empowered? And who can step in? So RFOs were named to step in and really punish it and really take action on sexual harassment. And there are some projects on the way. The project that Anke Lipinski is employed in has been mentioned already, and I think there is a link in the chat box right now. And we also need further developments towards a more intersectional approach. This is true for all kinds of activities that we employ in the context of gender equality work. And of course, strategic papers alone are not to to change anything. So this is more about tick boxing if it's just a paper, and implementation really has to be planned. And this is again a plea for having enough resources at the end of the day. You need to raise awareness. You need to have this capacity building, like finding allies, and also introducing resources in terms of also of knowledge into the institutions, and to create structures that can hand on this kind of knowledge, and the provision of tools and guidelines. And now, Angela, I think this is yours.
Yeah, I will come back to the morning session, and what we have, I think, learned there, or what has been stressed there, is that the potential that gender equality plans somehow carry to support or to initiate structural change is something that is based on several preconditions we should be aware of, and I think we should also formulate as recommendations or requirements. The first point we heard about, or we talked about in the morning, is that gaps and their content should be mandatory. So it's a bit development from a nice to have to a must have. And this implies or leads us to the question of sanction, which was discussed also in the chat in the morning, during the morning session a lot. What we also have heard, and what we would like to stress again, is that there should be a shared and substantive understanding of gender equality, and also of the objectives of structural change. I think it's not always clear that in the context of gender equality, we all are talking about the same things, even when we use the same vocab. What has also been stressed is the role or the relevance of meaningful monitoring, which in an ideal world provides room for reflexivity of what has been achieved and how developments are going on, or also why there is no change and the situation remains quite stable regarding gender inequalities. And as Brigitte has already mentioned, the resources in terms of budgets, but also in terms of expertise to support or to accompany the implementation of a gender equality plan. What we have raised as an issue also in our opening words is somehow the risk or the danger of a widening gap between more or less experienced institutions or countries in the context of gender equality policies. And what became clear for us in the discussion is that even in countries where there are sectors where a gender equality plan is mandatory, this also means that there is need for further development, and not in all countries, all sectors in higher education or in research and innovation are exposed to these requirements in the same way. So even within countries, this need to somehow provide room or possibilities for exchange of experiences and mutual learning seems to be important. And this is more than we had in mind in the morning. And last but not least, what has also been became quite clear is that there is a need of action at European, national, and institutional level. And I think the challenge is that the evolvement of these levels should be quite simultaneously and in a coordinated way, or following a coordinated approach. And this is probably one of the biggest challenges for policy development in the upcoming months and years. And now it's your turn, Brigitte. You have to unmute yourself.
So you missed a very nice joke. No, that's not true. We are really close to the end. So what we want to bring in again is the resources that have been created by both projects, Chico and Target. So consider our project websites and grab materials and information there. Thank you very much for joining this joint conference on gender equity. Now I say it once because I have read it in the chat. It's about equity. That's true. Chico project will be ending soon. Target a little bit later, like most probably by the end of the year. So you will maybe see one or another newsletter or Twitter news from both of the projects. What is there? Well, yeah, that is it. Thank you, Angela. Still a last word, because it's actually what I really need to do is I want to thank Target Project, because actually we were invited by our sister project for this joint conference, but it was organized in a way by Target. So thank you very much for having us here and for sharing your together the reflections and our learnings, and thank you.
Yeah, also from my side, thank you all for somehow staying with us this day, and although it is sometimes quite challenging to have these sessions virtually and not in person. I would also like to. Okay, I would.
Thank you so much for the organization.
Yeah, the organization was done by Notus, so the thanks goes to Notus. And yeah, we will stay in touch in the context of gender equality plans. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. May you all be nourished by our exchange and head on for gender equity.